I'd like to call the meeting of the October meeting of the Mission Fulfillment Committee to order. And first of all, I'll acknowledge that Regent Omari, the chair of this committee, is not here today. And we're also missing our support staff, Maggie. And so what you've got here is the B team, and I hope you'll be nice to us. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome the student representatives. Jael Karandi, did I say that right?
Jael Karandi.
Okay, please introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, my name is Jael Karandi. I'm a second-year student here on the Twin Cities campus studying finance and marketing, and I was raised in Plymouth, Minnesota.
All right, thank you. And Mackenzie Dice.
Hi, thank you, Regent Lucas. My name is Mackenzie Dice, and I'm representing the Morris campus. I'm an environmental science and German double major with a minor in chemistry, and I'm from Woodstock, Illinois originally, just north of Chicago, and I'm a senior this year. And this is my second year being with you all, so I'm excited to be here again. Thank you.
Already a senior, huh?
Yeah.
That's fast. Okay. Before we move to our first agenda item, I want to note that we're flipping items 2 and 3 in reverse order, and if time allows, we will take a break around 3 o'clock. So we'll move on to our first agenda item, which is the Board of Regents policy research involving human subjects. And bring to the table Vice President Levine.
Good afternoon, Chair Lucas and members of the committee. Today I'm here to talk about some changes in your policy, a Board of Regents policy, titled Research Involving Human Subjects. So if you'll notice in the changes, and it's been discussed by everyone from faculty through staff, through this group at some level, we've changed the word subjects to participants. So that's one change that's been made. If you look through here, you'll see subjects is still there in one place, but that's because it's the Code of Federal Regulation, and that's what they call it. So that stays in place. So that's one change. You'll also notice at the beginning there's a paragraph that was added, and Will Durfee had advocated for this as well as other faculty, and I brought it to the Senate last week and it got voted on. They were happy with it as well. You might remember these guiding principles were discussed back in 2016, and you actually approved them. And they're on different websites that we use, in our research website and others, and those guiding principles were added to this policy as well. So those changes were the principal changes that were made. You can see that we observe the consent process or conduct research directly through third parties. There's some changes there. Suspend or terminate research not conducted in accordance. We had some changes there with participants. So the changes are fairly minor in terms of the actual protocol itself. The main thing was adding the guiding principles, changing a few words, minor edits to align with federal regulatory processes and policies, and then we added a link to the new Administrative Policy Library and Toolkit for Human Research Protection Program. And that's about it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Vice President Levine regarding this? Wow, seeing none, we can move to the next item. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is a report on the Disability Support Services system-wide, and we're going to have a discussion about that. And coming to the table are Vice President Go, Associate Vice President Showers, and Vice Chancellor Irwin. Provost Hanson, would you like to introduce the subject?
Thank you, Chair Lucas. I will just add my welcome to the one the Chair just gave to Vice President for Equity and Diversity, Michael Go, who will introduce the agenda item in more detail and also introduce today's presenters. So I just turn it over to Michael.
Okay. Dr. Go.
All right. Thank you, Provost Hanson. Chair Lucas, members of the committee, I'm very pleased for this opportunity to highlight the work of our disability support services system-wide. As many of you are aware, we hold on to a broad definition of diversity that welcomes identities, including that of disability, to the University of Minnesota. In doing this work, we recognize that it is important to be able to help both faculty, staff, students, guests to succeed, whether as students or whether as faculty and staff, in order to do the work at the university. I have been a beneficiary of this work as a faculty member for 20 years, having witnessed how we make accommodations for students in my classroom. And now, as an administrator of this office that houses the Disability Support Services, I get to witness firsthand on a daily basis the commitment of the people that do this work, their proactivity, their intentionality, how students, faculty, and staff are treated as individuals, and with the goal, particularly in regards to students, that all students can succeed at the University of Minnesota. I am pleased to have joined me in this presentation from our Duluth campus, Vice Chancellor for Student Life and Dean of Students, Lisa Irwin, and Associate Vice President for Equity and Diversity, Julie Showers, who will showcase how we provide access to students, faculty, guests, staff with disabilities.
Thank you, Dr. Go. As Michael said, I'm Julie Showers, the Associate Vice President for Equity and Diversity. I'm so pleased to be here with you today to share the work that we do together in advancing system-wide access and opportunity for students, faculty, and staff with disabilities. It's my intention to move through a number of slides relatively quickly, knowing that you have more information in your docket materials. And then my friend and colleague, Dr. Irwin, will talk specifically about some of the excellent work being done in Duluth. And finally, we'll welcome any questions that you may have. Our work begins with the Board of Regents policy on disability services, which provides both guiding principles for our work and structure within which we are to implement those goals. Putting the information on this slide in my own words, it's the recognition that the University of Minnesota values diverse identities and experiences, and we recognize disability as an important aspect of human diversity. Access to educational resources, working environments, co-curricular programs, and other opportunities for people with disabilities enriches not only the experience of the person with the disability, but all members, that of all members and guests of the university as well. So as these principles are reduced to deliverables, there are many things which all 5 of our campuses have in common, and one is a consistent system-wide approach that focuses primarily on 3 goals. The first is equitable access to university resources for people with disabilities. In other words, the way we think about that is ensuring that a student with a disability has the opportunity to access the same resources necessary for their education as a student without a disability. The second bucket is providing reasonable accommodations where those are warranted. And third, promoting inclusive design, looking forward to ways in which we can reduce the barriers for individuals with disabilities before they're encountered. We undertake these responsibilities with our legal duties firmly in mind. Our work is governed primarily by the Americans with Disabilities Act as amended and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 requires specifically that no otherwise qualified person will be denied access to, participation in, or the benefits of any program or activity by the university because of a disability. Against that backdrop, all of our campuses take both a proactive approach to our work and a reactive approach. Promoting inclusive design is proactive. We know that access for individuals with disabilities can be significantly improved when we're intentional as we design our courses, programs, activities, and even our buildings to ensure that access is available before a disabled student or employee is impacted. Inclusive design allows individuals with disabilities to receive access to the resources they need sooner. And importantly, it also reduces the cost to the university of what can be costly remediation or retrofitting accommodations. For an example of inclusive design, there are certainly many, but one we see commonly is that if a faculty member approaching a class purchases, they often would require, for example, students to access curriculum in the form of web information, video clips, websites, that sort of thing. And if I, as a teacher, buy a film clip that's already captioned for use in my class, that means anyone in my class who is deaf or hard of hearing has the ability through that captioning, just subtitles as most of us would think of them, to access that material at the same time as their hearing colleagues. Again, access sooner, access with less isolation or marginalization, and reduced cost, because then it doesn't fall to a DRC staff member to do that captioning here at the university. Sometimes, however, we must be reactive and reasonable accommodations are necessary. All of our campuses use a very rigorous interactive process to determine reasonable accommodations. The interactive process, which you will hear us say over and over again, even though it sounds a little unwieldy, is a phrase under the law that's quite well defined, and it means essentially continuous engagement with the person with a disability to determine the impact of that disability on the environment in which a barrier is encountered. That could be a classroom, it could be a laboratory, it could be a residence hall, or a dining facility. There's nearly always more than one way to accommodate a situation, but the law gives us 4 prohibitions. We cannot offer a reasonable accommodation that compromises essential elements of a course, program, job, activity, or facility. A reasonable accommodation cannot cause an undue administrative or financial hardship. It cannot compromise the safety of the individual with a disability or others. And it cannot fundamentally alter a course or program. So we are not providing accommodations that change the subject matter mastery that's expected of a student or the competence of an employee. We're simply positioning them to be able to show that competence in a way similar to that of their peers without a disability. Therefore, each accommodation is tailored to an individual and very unique. This slide walks you through sort of the interactive process on the Twin Cities campus. And while it's denominated as a Twin Cities process, the process used by all of our campuses is really quite similar. It begins when a current or prospective student contacts the DRC, and lying therein, we have one of our first challenges. Because with each incoming class or as employees are hired, we lack the ability to predict the needs that they bring with them on a reliable basis. When they contact the DRC, the first step is a meeting with a staff person we call an access consultant. We have 16 access consultants, and they work with our students, staff, and faculty to identify, again, the nature of the disability. That requires the review of medical documentation from the student or employee's care providers. If no documentation exists, the access consultant can help the student obtain it. But before an accommodation is offered, that material is carefully reviewed by the student, often their care providers, sometimes their family members, and a DRC staff member. If accommodations are appropriate, the DRC itself will draft a letter that ultimately is provided to the student. In particularly complex cases, we ensure that we've consulted with the Office for General Counsel before that letter is issued. We encourage the student then to share the accommodation letter with each instructor so that they can continue the interactive process of determining how accommodations will be provided in that particular academic setting. We also encourage them to maintain that relationship throughout the year. If unexpected difficulties or barriers arise, they can go back to the access consultant for assistance in determining an appropriate way forward. I'm sorry, I have the fall crud. I'm hoping my voice will hang out with me here for as long as it needs to. Examples of some common accommodations include things like testing accommodations, note-taking assistance, sign language interpreting, or the type of captioning support, the provision of those subtitles I referred to, document conversion to create alternate text formats, which can be as simple as a required textbook printed in what feels like 0.8 font, right? Needing to be placed on a screen reader where a student or an employee has the capacity to make that print size larger so that a low vision student or employee can access it. We also have access assistants, distinct from access consultants. They're largely part-time employees, often students themselves, who help a student or an employee with a disability navigate their environment, whether that's help manipulating a particular piece of chemistry equipment in a laboratory, help with library materials, or any other sort of access that's required. I'm going, as I said, quite quickly, and I'm coming to a series of slides that shows you numerically some of our experience on the Twin Cities campus. And what you will see is, in general, increasing demands for these sorts of services, which our peer institutions are also experiencing. Before we look at the numbers, I wanted to comment specifically on what we feel are some of the likely drivers of that increased demand. The first, and one we consider a very positive evolution, is that there are students and staff here today at the university who would not have thought that a college education, particularly at a respected research institution like the University of Minnesota, was an option for them 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Social, technological, and medical advances are bringing those students to us and enabling them to go on to the kinds of success that might earlier in history have been impossible. We also see that our students are entering post-secondary education with expectations of assistance. They may have had experiences throughout their public school K through 12 experience where a lot of support was provided. The school identifies a disability, they come up with a plan for accommodation, they change, in some cases, the actual curriculum, and students arrive here lacking some of the necessary self-advocacy skills or the ability to navigate this new, more complex environment, often many, many miles away from their families. And all of us, I know I speak for Lisa and all of the staff in disability services on all of our campuses, want to emphasize this is not one and done. We've figured out your accommodation. You'll be fine now, right? We take seriously our obligation to also help those students develop the competency they will need for life after graduation, to be able to identify the impacts of their disability and advocate for ways that disability can be accommodated by their employer. We also know as a fact that mental health conditions often emerge between the ages of 18 and 25, the ages of a majority of our students. And finally, turning to the employees for a minute, and I have to admit this one hits close to home. We have an aging workforce. The average age of the University of Minnesota employee today is 47. And I can speak for myself, as we get older, we bring additional needs into the workplace with us. There are also system-related decisions we've made that may increase demands for service. The only one on this slide which mentions a number that I want to talk about particularly is our model of having a centralized DRC service. It's something that distinguishes us in a very positive way from our peers. In many institutions, you would find the services we offer spread among many different and diffuse parts of the university. You may find an office in student affairs dealing with student accommodation or student assistance. You may find that HR dealt with employee accommodations. You might find that academic departments or units themselves have the responsibility for identifying and implementing accommodations. And here at the University of Minnesota, we're different. We've created essentially a model that's one-stop shopping so that a student or staff member or faculty who needs assistance can come through the doors just below us in this building of the Disability Resource Center and engage immediately with an educated and informed person who can help guide their experience, identify resources, and support them in doing their absolutely best work here. So, coming fast at you now, some of the numbers on a campus-specific basis, beginning with the Twin Cities. I must mention that our DRC here on the Twin Cities campus serves faculty, staff, students, and guests on this campus, as well as extension services throughout Minnesota. The director of the DRC, Donna Johnson, you wave, who is with us today, serves as the ADA coordinator for faculty and staff on all campuses, and I guarantee you will make me look like the B team if you get into really, really detailed questions. Donna holds biweekly case consultations on a system-wide basis with the disability staff on all of our campuses to ensure that we're not reinventing the wheel, to ensure that we're sharing best practices, to ensuring that, for example, for a disability staff person on the Crookston campus who's confronting a particularly difficult situation, they have access to the experts in Rochester, Duluth, Morris, and Minnesota who may have confronted the challenge previously. It also encourages consistency in the experience our staff and students will have as they navigate these pathways. So these are the numbers. The first slide shows the number of students, faculty, and staff served here in the Twin Cities through the Disability Resource Center. And you've heard me say that we're experiencing increasing demand, and I know the chart looks a little bit up and down like. The 2 down years, we believe, were caused in large part by the purging of inactive or closed files, reducing an overall count, and offsetting what we believe may otherwise have been an increase. It's enough to say that in the last year, from fiscal year 17 to 18, we experienced a 17% increase in the number of students and staff served. If you take those students, 3,736 served in fiscal year 18, and the 16 access consultants we have serving them, the caseload is 233 to 1. What services do we provide? The first slide mentions interpreting hours, and that is American Sign Language interpreting that you may be familiar with in seeing the interpreter in front of an auditorium or in front of a classroom. And you'll note, too, that there's a fairly dramatic drop in those numbers for fiscal year 18. And we attribute that in part to technology overtaking that function. And for students to be able to access that information not through an interpreter, but, for example, through the captioning that I mentioned before. And here we have captioning, 2 kinds of captioning. This slide addresses real-time captioning. So if this proceeding were real-time captioned, there'd be an individual here who would be typing and therefore interpreting the discussion as we speak onto a screen accessible for the deaf or hard of hearing. Media captioning is what I talked about when we have other sorts of media that come to us, perhaps uncaptioned, and need to be provided with captioning before they're used by students or staff. Again, this overall, if you compare fiscal 18 to fiscal 14, again, there's a drop. Just keep in mind that if I use the same textbook every year or the same digital material, it only needs to be captioned once, and then that resource will be reused in successive years. We have significant demand for assistance in administering tests for students requiring testing accommodation. You see this number go up year over year. The hours of access assistance refers to those student employees that I talked about that assist individuals with navigating their daily routines to ensure that their disability doesn't present inequitable barriers. And document conversion, again, is taking a document that is provided to a student perhaps in an inaccessible format and transforming it into one that is available to the student. Our document conversion staff converted 215,000 pages in fiscal year 18. The last slide simply summarizes the information on the preceding slides. And I'll turn to our system campuses. In Crookston, the data shows, like in the Twin Cities, a steady increase in the number of students seeking and being served. In Morris, the number also increases until fiscal year 18, when there's a decrease. We can perhaps attribute part of that also to a decrease in enrollment, but I think it highlights for you the difficulty we have in trying to determine who's coming to campus next fall, and what needs do they bring with them? A single student who is blind or low vision can drive a substantial number of service hours. In Rochester, we have data for 2 years, again, showing in this case a 26% increase from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 18. And at this point, I want to put the spotlight on Lisa, because in many ways, my colleagues in Duluth are leading this work, particularly around areas of accessible technology. And I know I'll let you tell your story.
Thank you. Let's first look at the data, Julie. So if we can go to the next slide, you'll see a similar slide that talks about the number of students served, 500 students, and we have 3 access consultants on the Duluth campus. On the next slide, you'll see an illustration of the primary disability condition by year. And this is consistent with the information that Julie shared previously, and that is that mental health continues to be the largest challenge among those conditions that we see. And then finally, tests administered, our numbers continue to increase. Chair Lucas and committee, I'm really grateful to be here to tell a remarkable success story that illustrates one of the creative ways we're attempting to meet the increased demand and to support our students in their success. So for over 10 years, Disability Resources used a records management database. And over time, it became clear that this approach did not meet the expectations of our students, who conduct much of their lives on the internet and on their devices. So our director, Emily Norenberg, and her team began to investigate some commercial options for a new database that would include a web interface for our students. But the products they found did not adequately address the features that we wanted, and they were expensive. So Emily turned to our UMD Information Technology Services and Systems Department and partnered with them to develop a homegrown, web-based database that was launched in October of last year. So we've had it about a year. And it's rolling out in phases. And phase 1 included the records component, so we have our student records now in this secure database that ITSS designed. And the current phase, just launched this fall, is a student portal where students can go online and begin the request for their accommodations. Our hope is that by the end of this year, we'll have added online functionality for our students to schedule their appointments, schedule their exams, and send their faculty accommodation notices, as well as submit their documentation. So the bottom line for us is that by providing self-service options, students gain independence as well as skill development and self-advocacy in managing their own accommodations, which Julie alluded to earlier. In addition, the precious staff time that we have can be reallocated to serve the growing number of students who need accommodations, along with increasing the capacity for our staff to engage in that interactive process with our students and meet the complex set of needs that they present. Maybe the best news of all is that this new UMD database was shared with system colleagues through one of those biweekly system consultations that Julie described. Crookston and Morris were both interested in the database and have implemented it on their campus this fall at a cost of $3,000 rather than $30,000 is what commercial products cost. This is a truly excellent example of collaboration around the system. So again, we thank you for this opportunity to present the information, and we'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Have you looked into exporting that database and to other institutions, or is it too personalized?
Chair Lucas, we're really excited to explore that, and I listened with interest earlier to some of the conversations around how we sell software other places. Emily Norenberg, the director at our campus, was a consultant on a program review at Mankato. She identified their need right away, so we'll probably name it Bulldog something.
Well, congratulations, that's great. So, anyone have questions, comments? Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. On the mental health issues, how do you watch that? I'm assuming you're talking about anxiety, depression, suicide. You see a change in that, and how do you monitor that, and how do you address it?
How do we monitor and address it? Certainly we see it, right? The increasing demand for mental health care and services year over year. There are a number of ways, thanks in many ways to actions of this board and the university leaders, to have added lines of service for mental health professionals who we hope those lines will reduce wait times and guarantee that students who are in need of assistance receive that in a timely fashion. I can't say enough about how an access consultant works with the students who are part of their portfolio. They get to know them as humans. And please forgive me, I felt uncomfortable because so much of the information I delivered today seems and felt to me so clinical. And this is work done in relationship. It is not about the numbers. So there are often close and ongoing relationships that are formed and nurtured between DRC staff and the students whom they support. Often what our DRC staff will tell me is the greatest reward for them is to go to commencement exercises and see those students that they walked alongside with every step of the way successfully complete their academic program. So we hope that relationship in and of itself reduces some of the barriers a student might experience in walking into a strange office to talk to someone they don't know, to divulge things that are really personal. And we hope that it encourages them to interact rather than to isolate, which many mental health conditions would normally produce. And so those people are uniquely poised to know the student, know their individual circumstance, and to be able to provide them with resources as quickly as possible to address their situation.
Chair Lucas, may I add?
Yes, please.
Regent Simonson, one way that we monitor these issues on the Duluth campus is through our student care team, which meets every other week and collectively brings together the stories and issues that we're hearing around campus. And our disability director is on that team and part of that team and helps us make those connections. I think the other thing that's important to add is we get amazing data because Boynton Health Services here on the Twin Cities campus has a survey that they implement that allows us to look at data over time to see the frequency of those issues and what kind of issues our students are experiencing.
Just to follow up, I'm onboarding, so I'm visiting different campuses and stuff. And I was at Rochester a couple weeks ago. I really appreciated their interaction, faculty to staff. I mean, the faculty's out there in the hallway, one-on-one meetings all the time. Are we seeing that across the system?
We approach, as I said, the work as work in partnership with others. And for students, the partnership with our academic departments is sort of preeminent in that work. And we've found tremendous support from both the Office of the Provost and our various deans, administrative leaders, and departmental heads and chairs. And the shift we're trying to make is a difficult one because it requires more work from each partner to the work to shift again to anticipating needs and preparing for those in ways that allow students smoother access and also eliminate peak demands for our services. A simple example, if all faculty identified course materials that required conversion in the spring, our staff could do that work over the summer, a period of low demand. And instead of experiencing what is more typical, which is the return to school, the return to focus on the immediate needs, and then significant demands all coming in at one time. So are we making progress? Yes, I absolutely believe we are. And is there more work to be done? Yes.
Okay, Vice President Goh, you had a comment?
Yes, a quick one. Chair Lucas, Regent Simonson, this is an example of how we have, I think, successfully partnered or continue to be more successfully partnered with the faculty who basically have the front lines of contact with students, both in terms of educating them about student mental health issues at new faculty orientation, at college assemblies, with new chairs orientation, simple acts of putting a paragraph in the course syllabus about how students can access resources, as well as considering how their pedagogy, how they organize classes, how they arrange assignments, due dates, how they can play a role in reducing some of the anxiety as well.
One more quick question.
Sure, follow up.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. So do you have any metrics associating these mental health issues that we're talking about with addictions?
Oh, I would have to defer if, with the chair's permission. I'm not certain, Donna, if you have those numbers? No. We can look into it for you. I know, and we have prepared a brochure that I'm hoping you have either been given or will be given. You have it, I see, that gives you the percentage of the various sorts of disabilities that bring students to our attention. And you can see in there the very large slice of the pie that is mental health. I believe on the student side, addiction doesn't rise to the level of having its own percentage, but undeniably we have students who struggle with chemical dependency and substance abuse during their experience here.
Thank you.
Okay, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. Thank you, presenters. Staying on mental health, I'm trying to understand how a student who has a mental health issue comes into the system, at least your part of the system. I'm not sure. Actually, do you control all of mental health, or do you just control part of it after someone's been diagnosed with something? I'm not sure if, I thought Boynton reported, at least on the Twin Cities campus, reported through the Office of Student Affairs, but if you could just help me understand that, I appreciate it.
Chair Lucas, Regent Hsu, I'd be happy to try. Students present in different ways. Unlike K through 12, it is the responsibility of the student in post-secondary education to identify themselves to us and their need for some type of service. We try to proactively make incoming students aware of the services, and we certainly encourage them to engage with the Disability Service Office on all of our campuses as early as possible before problems escalate. And we have both experiences. Students come in with a very well-established disability, a very clear understanding of their disability, and a history of long-time continuity in healthcare providers who provide us with the very specific information that we need. Our professionals aren't medical healthcare providers, so we're never in the position of making a diagnosis of one sort or another. But we do review that information, and if there is something that is incomplete or confusing about the information a provider offers through the student, we can go back to that provider until questions have been answered to our satisfaction. It also happens, as you heard me say, that either the underlying condition doesn't emerge until the student is here, or just being realistic, many students hope tremendously, although they may have struggled K through 12, that they will get to the university and be able to be successful and pull themselves up by their bootstraps and navigate this very complex environment. And they want very desperately not to be different from any of their peers in that respect. And so for some of those students, we're playing catch up. Either for the one where the condition is just manifested, they have no history of care. And they have to find resources to allow that diagnosis to take place before our process can step in with accommodations. For those that have not shared those diagnoses, unfortunately, it'll often appear after a failed midterm, for example, right? And the sense that, wow, I am suddenly struggling, I'm not feeling successful, I feel anxious, depressed, whatever the case may be. And so then we work to catch up with that student and their specific information.
Chair Lucas, Regents, I would add that our counseling does report through student life, student affairs on this campus, but there are many referrals from the counseling folks to the folks in disability resources. So sometimes that's the connection, presenting to counselors who then can make the referral to disability resources.
Follow up. Thank you, Chair. Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, because it sounds like you're more connected than the Twin Cities campus is, and I'm just wondering if everybody's integrated together so that so people don't fall through the cracks, you know, if they're diagnosed and then nobody follows up on whether they're getting disability support services, then, you know, then we have problems, right? But if there was a connection between the two where, you know, and a referral is one thing, and I understand they're all adults, and most of them are adults anyway, and they should be able to advocate for themselves. But I do see some people possibly getting lost in the system. So.
Chair Lucas and Regent Hsu, yes, and we're very concerned about that. We do have the same similar reciprocal referrals and care teams where an access consultant in the DRC can see in a file comments entered about the student's particular current experience through our counseling services, and those two units do work very closely together. And it's really triage, because a student can enter this system through multiple points of entry. One of the things we've done specifically this year, because we saw a sharp increase of requests for service early in the fall semester, and wait times that began to get close to a week for a student to actually be able to sit down with an access consultant, was to create and allow more informal drop-in hours so that a student feeling that they need attention more urgently doesn't need to wait for a specific time where they've been assigned an appointment, and we find that's been really helpful in reducing those wait times.
Thank you.
Okay, Regent Anderson, did you have a question?
I have comments.
Comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lucas. So I was sitting listening to the presentation, and I pick up on certain things that just piqued my interest, and a couple questions. Talked about disability testing. So if you come from 150 miles away like I do, I stay at the hotel on campus here, and there are times around finals week that in the ballrooms and things over there are all these signs that say disability testing. I got three quick questions. So I want you to answer that. The second thing is talked about interpreters, and I think you're really proactive if you can buy videos that have the language on them and stuff. I know interpreters are very expensive, and I'm wondering if we have them on staff or if we hire them per time or if we do it a little of both. The third thing I'll mention is my guess is we do disability support at the University of Minnesota pretty darn good. I guess pretty darn good to excellent. So I also tell you that coming from a rural area, we have potential students that have disabilities and look at where am I going to go to college? Where am I, especially parents I know are worried of their children getting help. If we do it good, do we let counselors and that know that we do it good so these kids and their parents have an answer about where they can go? So if you could answer that, the tests, interpreters, marketing, and then I've got a quick comment when you're done with that.
Of course. Chair Lucas, Regent Anderson, I'm happy to. You have put your finger on one issue that plagues us here on the Twin Cities campus with respect to the DRC, and that's space. With the increasing demand for testing accommodations, and testing accommodations sort of cover a spectrum. It may be a requirement for private testing. More commonly, probably a requirement for semi-private testing. There might need to be access to technology like a screen reader. You might need to be able to deliver your answers orally rather than in writing. You may need someone who is managing time. We certainly need proctors to ensure that the honor code is being maintained, even when someone is taking an exam in an area that is disparate geographically from the remainder of the testing space. So we have over the last year actually worked really closely with facilities, capital planning, space management, and real estate to see what we can do. Because up until now, we have, and I might be number one or so off, we have about 37 private or semi-private testing spaces within the DRC. And after that, we start kicking our own staff out of their offices so that students can access those offices in times of peak demand, right? Because all the finals are going to fall in the same week. And there are really, really popular slots for those where we may have 100 students presenting and existing space that can accommodate about a third of that. So that's why you see us in the graduate where we use ballrooms or meeting rooms and pipe and drape. So we're setting up essentially little cubicles for a student who needs more privacy or a reduced distraction environment. We would love to bring that back on campus for any number of reasons. The primary one being cost, but also efficiency of our staff needing to oversee and manage a number of different locations. So far, we haven't been successful in identifying any available space. So our friends in kind of that area of the university have moved on to seeing, is there other space that would be more suitable, either very adjacent or very close to the university that might be less expensive? So we continue to search, and we certainly welcome any ideas or advice. So that would be my comment on the space. On the interpreters, we do have our own interpreters on staff, and we are unique in that way. It's one of the ways in which the University of Minnesota distinguishes itself in services for deaf or hard of hearing students. We have, again, I want to look behind me, I'm going to say maybe 10 or 11, and they have a variety of schedules where we try to reduce from a 12-month schedule to a 10-month schedule because demand isn't as high in the summer, and we save some money that way, so we try to be very budget conscious. But we do have our own staff. The benefits we see to that, we hope, are the establishment and nurturing of relationships where a deaf or hard of hearing student isn't necessarily seeing a different service provider every time. And like any other relationship, the fit and the dynamic between the person needing services and the person providing them is quite individualized and unique. And so we try as best we can to accommodate preferences coming from students for a particular service provider. That is not always sufficient in, again, times of peak demand to manage the student needs. So we also have a pool, I would say, of well-vetted outside either individual vendors or services that supplement our staff in times of peak demand when they're needed.
Thank you. Finally, my other comment, Regent Powell and I had an exchange this morning about the reallocations and how that can really help us on efficiencies. And Regent Simonson hasn't been here long enough to remember or he wasn't here. One of the things I thought about as you were talking, administration goes to our 52 budget units every year and says, you know, you need to shave 100,000 off or 200,000 or whatever, and then gets this bag of money they can reallocate to places of need. Probably 2 years ago, we heard of areas of need for counselors. And so that reallocation money, much of it went to hire more counselors, which has helped your problem. Is that not right? So again, a good use of resources, which wasn't financial, but we reallocated. So that was my point. Thank you.
No, that's great. The fact that you have 37 private and semi-private spaces tells me what kind of demand you're up against, and you still short a space. So thanks for sharing that. Regent Powell?
My questions have been covered by other regents, so I'll pass.
Okay. Regent Simonson has another quick.
Just real quickly, this is something that's really important to me. I deal with the recovery program in our area and take it inside the jail once a week as well. And so it's a very important issue with me. I see a lot of young men and women in these programs that are in mental health issues associated with it. Real quickly, you may have answered this and I didn't see it. Do you have like AA or NA programs on campus?
Chair Lucas and Regent Simonson, I actually deferred from doing this last time, but I'm going to do it now and share with you. The answer is there is a program on campus that I believe is called, I don't know if I'll get the acronym right, Sober Students Off Booze Enjoying Recovery. There you go, SOBER. It is not well attended. It's not well publicized. It's not necessarily presently terribly engaged with the students, which is frustrating given that we know that the student demand is there. And the reason I said I'll share this now, and I appreciate having the opportunity to do it, my son is one of those students. My son is now 24. He grew up here. He was a two-sport varsity athlete in college. In high school. He was a newspaper editor. He was the graduation speaker for Hopkins High School the year he graduated. And he came on to college scoring in the top half of 1% of cognitive aptitude among students his year. And only at the time of his graduation and thereafter began to struggle with a mental health condition, anxiety, depression, showing up in ways that, as you might imagine, for an 18-year-old student coming to the University of Minnesota, social interaction involves occasionally more alcohol than we would like it to here. So that sense of needing to feel socially comfortable, followed by the need to go to sleep, followed by the need to motivate to get out of your house, led him to abuse alcohol. He eventually withdrew from classes in a particular semester, went to Hazelden's Young Adult Facility in Plymouth, and next week will have been sober for 4 years and is preparing to sit for licensure as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor to serve the community that so transformed his life. He would not have done that, in my opinion, without the services of the DRC. Because by identifying himself as someone who needed accommodation, he was allowed to withdraw from the semester where he went into treatment without penalty. He was allowed to return when he spent 6 months in a sober house in St. Paul, engaged every day in an AA program and step-down counseling, and carried only a course load of 2 rather than 3 or 4 classes to allow him to be both successful in recovery and successful academically. And those sorts of support, it's not rocket scientists, right? I could tell you those stories if I had the ability from a confidentiality perspective. We have a deaf student who graduated and has gone on to become the first deaf flight engineer at NASA, right? Our students are doing amazing things with the support that's being provided. My son is one of many facing a garden variety challenge, but his ability to conquer it, to excel, and to pursue what he wants to do in his life is a result of the services we provide. And I'd be happy to talk to you privately further.
Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty powerful. Regent McMillan, you have.
Thank you, Chair Lucas, and yes, thank you for sharing that compelling and personal story. A question, in addition, beyond resources, that you know, a big part of this is our understanding of what we need so we can continue to properly resource you to do this important work. But setting aside the level of resources, as we get into a tight labor market that we all face now, as you think about inside your DRC or up at UMD, what talent pool is most in demand? Is it counselors, interpreters, mental health professionals? Is it everything, or is there an area where you really struggle to keep the kind of talent you need to serve these students?
Speaking for the Twin Cities, Chair Lucas and Regent McMillan, speaking for the Twin Cities campus, there are two that I would highlight, I think. The first being, and they're plagued by different challenges, as you might assume. One is the population of access consultants that I referred to. And we distinguish between access consultants that serve students and those that are part of what we call our U-Return program that serves faculty and staff or employees. That calls for a high degree of proficiency, sophistication, and we would dearly love to see continuity in those ranks, because the more you learn about successful ways to respond to a particular challenge, the less time it takes you to do it next time. And I think we've had a great deal of turnover in those ranks because the level of compensation we provide isn't competitive with other opportunities they have in the marketplace. So that's one. I would say the other can't be solved certainly by financial resources alone, but as you heard me say, we have a pool of about 50 or so access assistants who are students themselves. So by its very nature, they're serving a student who has certain classes and certain schedules and needs to take certain tests at certain times, and so do they. And they also, we all hope, are here for an appropriately confined length of time. So by definition, we have no continuity truly over the years. So we're constantly in a cycle of educating and training and hoping to retain to the greatest extent we can those students. And students, just like every other classification here, I think, are requiring a higher and higher level of compensation as well to compete with other financial opportunities they have outside the university.
Thank you. I think we have to move on, but we'd like to wrap it up with a comment from Student Representative Dice.
Oh, thanks, Regent Lucas, and I'll make it really quick. I just wanted to say that just on behalf of students, we are really appreciative of the work that you do in making sure that we get the accommodations that we need to be successful and contribute to the success of the university, so we really appreciate that. That being said, I know that the student representatives have always had this conversation every single year, and it always comes up, is that it's not enough, that we're not getting enough counselors on each campus. We're not, getting the, the access that we need. Students for health service or mental health services on the Twin Cities campus are waiting 3 weeks, or however long to get into an appointment. And so it's never enough, right? But that's where there's a lot of room for improvement. You yourself said that, there's students come into university and they acquire mental health cases and issues and things like that, basically, just because it's so stressful and it's just a completely new environment. They're away from home. They have heavy class loads. They're involved in everything. And it creates stress on mental health. And so it's just a matter of finding out where we can increase services to those students. And I think a huge part of that is making sure we have more counselors, more therapists, whatever students are needing. And it's really important to look at those numbers specifically to say, yeah, we need to make sure that we're getting this specific thing to students now, because it's something that they need.
Thank you.
May I respond? Really appreciate the comment, Representative Dice. And we are in Duluth are really attuned to this, and we are constantly monitoring our service levels in disability resources as well as mental health. So we're really appreciating the opportunity to partner with you as students on bringing those sorts of possibilities forward to system leadership and the board. So I want to say back to appreciate how much your advocacy for the mental health counselors made a difference in the process.
Well, thank you very much.
We're here.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for that very enlightening presentation. And we'll move on to our next item. Our next item is a discussion about student education records. Before we begin, I want to make a few comments. First, the purpose of this item is to provide the committee with background and applicable law and policy governing how the university handles student data. We do not have a proposal before us for review or action. Today is about building our understanding of the various interests that surround this topic. I know some of us have engaged in this topic more deeply than others, but some of the board has not. Second, I understand that the Greek community has strong interest in this topic. The administration has committed to meet with the Greek organization representatives, which committee leadership supports. While that meeting has not yet taken place, it is important for us to discuss this today, so if a policy change is needed or desired, we are prepared to consider those changes. As we will hear today, this is ultimately a policy choice. Provost Hanson, would you like to lead us off and introduce the presenters?
Thank you, Chair Lucas. I have asked three colleagues, Bob McMaster, Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, Brent Benrud, Senior Associate General Counsel, and Stacy Tidball, Director of Continuity and Compliance and Academic Support Resources, to join us today to discuss the Board of Regents policy student education records, and to provide additional detail about the related administrative practices and procedures and some history around releasing student directory data. As the chair mentioned, this is meant to be a baseline session on this topic. There are a number of issues that swirl around student records and data privacy, and you may well want to follow up on some of these, perhaps at dedicated sessions. And if so, we'd of course be happy to assist with that. This is history.
Okay, so please proceed. I don't know who's going first, but looks like Bob McMaster.
Thank you, Chair Lucas and Provost Hanson, members of the committee. I have to admit I'm feeling very safe today because I'm between two attorneys. So the goal of our session here is to have a discussion on board and administrative policies around student records. There are a set of policies on both sides, board and administration, that guide this. We wanted to spend some time reviewing the practice of the release on the 10th day. If truth be told, it's the 11th day. We lock things down at 5 p.m. on the 10th day, so it takes some time to process the information. And I'm joined by, as Provost Hanson mentioned, two colleagues who are going to participate. So we're going to start with Stacy talking about data governance and some of the policies.
Thank you, Chair Lucas and members of the committee, and thank you, Vice Provost McMaster. This first slide is to illustrate student data governance at the university. There's an established framework at the institution for how to identify what data is public and what is private, and then how to manage that information. As I'm sure you are aware, the university has a large volume of student data that spans academics, advising, demographic, financial, and student affairs data. A combination of law and university policy governs this information, the vast majority of which is private. A small subset of student data is considered public, and that's the focus of the presentation today. As most institutions do, the University of Minnesota has established that its university registrar is the data owner for student data, which is a specific role. The roles of data owner and then data custodian are documented in our university information security policies. The responsibilities of those roles are to be accountable for and be good stewards of the data. And data custodians must also appropriately limit access to private data. As I mentioned, the vast majority of student data here is private data, but institutions are allowed to designate some information as public, otherwise called directory information. The Board of Regents policy on student education records governs student information privacy here and sets forth what items are considered public or directory at the University of Minnesota. The directory information items are noted on the slide and focus on the student's basic contact information and academic status, such as their college and major. The board does have discretion to adjust what items could be considered directory information. By law and policy, students must have notice of what information is directory information at the institution they attend. And they must also have the ability to restrict access to their public information. This is known as the opportunity to suppress. The specific language for this requirement is part of our Board of Regents policy and states specifically, students shall be given the opportunity to suppress their directory information during the term of their enrollment. Students can choose to leave all of their directory information as is public. They can suppress some portion of it, such as just their telephone numbers, or they can do what is known as fully suppress their information, which makes all of their information private here at the university.
Students learn about this process in a variety of ways, and they are able to suppress their information or change those elections using our MyU portal. When students have had the opportunity to suppress their directory information, but have elected to keep it public, it can be the subject of a public records request. We have an administrative policy on this matter, the Public Access to University Information Policy. Essentially, public records requests for data are submitted directly to or routed to a university portal for these matters. The requests are then reviewed to determine if there's public data, and then they're routed to an appropriate office for fulfillment. In the event that a request is for student directory information, it's forwarded to the Office of Institutional Research to produce the list.
Of course, what we're talking about here relates in many ways to the enrollment process and admissions. So we wanted to spend a bit of time just running through this and reviewing when students actually enroll, when they confirm, and when they arrive on campus. So the way this works is the application opens on August 1st. We have a November 1st early action deadline. And students who send in their application by that deadline will learn by January 1st whether they've been admitted, not admitted, or waitlisted. There's another January 1st regular deadline where students will learn the decision at the end of April. We use, as I think most of you know, what's called rolling admissions through the year. Students are actually admitted throughout the entire review process beginning in September. The Twin Cities has already admitted probably 600 to 700 students. All admitted students must confirm their intention to come to the university by May 1st. What's interesting is that over the summer, students change their mind. About 7% of the students who have confirmed by May 1st or within the first few weeks in May never show up on the as classes begin around the 10th day. This is what we call summer melt. Some withdraw, they let us know. Some don't show up for orientation. Some attend orientation, but don't attend classes, or they attend the first day of class and don't make it to the 10th day, they withdraw. Surprisingly, we have students who now will confirm at multiple institutions, pay the confirm fee, even go so far as to go through multiple orientations over the summer. They must really like orientation, and then simply not show up at one or more institutions. This is a practice which obviously is discouraged by the admissions directors and is pretty unethical. Admitted and confirmed students register for classes during the summer orientation period. So starting in June through August, with most of the students going through orientation through July, students come in for 2 days for the orientation, and that's when they register for classes. The first day is when we take one measure of the enrollment, but the formal census day is on the 10th day. That's a national established date, not something we made up. So that's the census day. After that, we send the data on to iPads. Once the directory information is made available in the student directory, it must be released to any requester through the mechanisms that Stacy documented. That includes private companies after that point in time. We feel, given the potential volume of messages and information that could inundate students, the university needs to be somewhat selective in its communications over the summer and really preserve that for key communication. There's a long list of critical messages that go out from the university to students. Email is the official form of university correspondence. Students are responsible for reading and reacting to any critical email. What I provided here are just an example of some of the messages that we push out over the summer. There's a long, long list. There's probably 25 to 30 critical messages that get get pushed out around advising and housing and classes, and we assume that students receive that and read those messages. We're concerned with what could be email overload over the summer, especially from external entities, credit card companies, non-university owned apartment complexes, local businesses, and so on. Again, we have a sense that could muddy the waters in terms of the ability of a student to really focus on the key messages that they have to respond to by orientation and then welcome week. We feel the best practice, which we have mostly used over the last decade, is to release the student directory on the 11th day or shortly thereafter. And as we did some homework with our peers, many of our peers also have that same policy strategy of releasing, formally releasing the student directory after the 10th day as quickly as you can compile and analyze the data. I think I've already mentioned the census date here. Finally, I wanted to mention student concerns. In a March 2018 report of the student representatives to this board, they noted that students need to be even more aware of the directory information, what we're pushing out, their ability to suppress it, and implications for public information. And perhaps most importantly, the point here is that they're concerned about the volume that key messages will get drowned out and that there'll be an unreasonable number of advertisements and surveys. So there's a balance here in terms of critical messages that we feel have to be pushed out, students have to respond to, and a potential volume. And so although there are other possibilities that have been mentioned in terms of the release of the directory, the Provost's office feels best practice remains 10th day. And I think we can now have a discussion and conversation around our stance here.
Could I just quickly ask what the percentages of people who choose to suppress? Do you know?
Thank you, Chair Lucas and members of the committee. I have an estimate for you, and I could verify those numbers for you at a later time if that's helpful. There are a couple of different versions of suppression. So some students elect to just take their contact information, either address, telephone, both, or with their email also out of the loop, if you will, or they can do what is called full suppression. The number of students, historically when I've looked at those numbers that have elected full suppression is fairly small, 5% or less, often more around 2% if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. Students that choose any version of suppression, such as just excluding their telephone numbers, that number is higher and probably increasing. If memory serves, the last time I looked, it was approximately 20%, but I would definitely want to verify those numbers for you.
Okay. Do we have regents that have questions, comments? Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and presenter. What would be the volume of emails that a student would get these from a commercial solicitation during the, we're talking about hundreds or thousands during the course of a semester?
Chair Lucas, Regent Beeson, if we're talking about the summer months, which we're most concerned about, we don't know because our policy has been mostly to release on the 10th day. So we're estimating that if the student directory was released early on, and as it became known that companies could have access to it, the volume would likely increase quickly.
What about during the fall semester?
Thank you, Chair Lucas, Regent Beeson, members of the committee. I don't have a number for you. I imagine that some of what we could get would be looking at the number of requests for student directory that come in on a semester basis. You know, people have outdated lists that they will also work from, so that the number of requests that come in doesn't exactly mirror the number of emails that ultimately reach students. They do receive a large number of inquiries that are commercial in nature and also surveys.
Madam Chair, well, this strikes me as an issue that students really need to drive, and to, even with suppression, there feels like a distraction for students to be on lists, but I think it's up to students, whether in student groups, whether they think this is a burden the way the policy is written.
Thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few questions. You mentioned there are other Big Ten schools, and you used a term that kind of stood out to me a little bit, in that it said formally releasing, before they formally release on the 10th. Do any of these schools, institutions, to your knowledge, certainly you can track it down, but do they have other processes for providing student data prior to that point to student groups, for instance? Because certainly some of those schools have, and I think the chair spoke to the Greek system earlier, where they have fairly significant rush activities before school starts. Do they have other processes where student groups, not necessarily just the Greeks, have access to students so that they can make their presence aware and engage in recruitment?
Chair Lucas, Regent Rocha, what we've found from the other institutions is just their formal policy about when they release the student directory. So I really can't answer that. I can say that even at the University of Minnesota, we do allow for certain student groups to send out select messages ahead of time. So there is a bit of wiggle room in terms of student affairs and our academic affairs being able to push out some messages that we think are appropriate.
Madam Chair, if I can follow up. Mr. Peterson put together, from the General Counsel's office, we received a memo that kind of laid out these legal concepts. And what I find very interesting, obviously the definition of enroll is very broad. And there's even because we have two issues. You got attend and you got enroll. And, enroll being our policy, attend being the FERPA policy. And so then the question is, how do we act with integrity on the legal standard? I guess I could pose a series of questions, but it's probably faster just to sort of make the point that, to suggest that a student is not enrolled at the University of Minnesota till the 11th day of the semester is just, it doesn't stand up. And stop me if I misstate, but we exercise student conduct code jurisdiction over people when they come here in the spring prior to even enrolling. So if they come here for, let's say, an athletics scholarship or to start in spring practice, if they act out, and it's pretty remarkable to me to think that we would exercise jurisdiction over somebody if they're not enrolled at our institution or if they're not attending the University of Minnesota, because clearly I think they would be. We offer all kinds of things to students. They have access to counseling, they have access to advisors, they have access to student tickets, for sporting events and so on. So, there are an awful lot of things that would certainly reflect that a person is enrolled or attending the university before the 11th day. And again, to suggest that they're not attending or enrolled at the university on the 11th day, if somebody committed an act against another student on day 10 or day 9 and then quickly disenrolled, or, we certainly would not say, well, I guess we just can't take action against you because you're not enrolled at the university on 11th day. I don't think that necessarily holds up, but bringing it back, I guess that's sort of my way of saying that I don't really see that within the bandwidth of possible results. I think that certainly the first day a person's sitting in class, you would say they're attending a class at the University of Minnesota. So if it's not the first day, then is it, is it this May 1st day when they have to, or whatever point they confirm that they are attending the University of Minnesota? Because actually, I go back and check our minutes. I thought you said the student must confirm their attendance by May 1st. Well, if they're confirming their attendance, you certainly would have a basis to say they're attending the University of Minnesota, even though they may not actually end up in that seat on that given day, but that can happen on any given day. So it comes back, and Regent Beeson, I think, started us down the right trail as we talk about the policy implications of which date we ultimately decide works. My bias, and of course it was a different era because you had to pay some amount of postage to bother me as a senior in high school. But I was excited when I was, admitted to the university and I started getting all these materials. I was actually admitted to 2 different schools. I didn't take the unethical route of attending 2 orientations. But,
thank you.
You're welcome. I kind of suspect that people don't realize what a burden it is to go all the way through orientation and then not show up. It kind of reminds me of after my wedding, I realized all those years I didn't turn in my RSVPs. I wasn't a very nice person for doing that, realizing how important that is. But anyway, so I think that you actually miss an opportunity. I started getting excited about the school. I started thinking, I think it actually can help your institution sort of connect with somebody who's going to be coming in. You note that FERPA talks about parents. Well, this institution, the overwhelming majority of people are adults by the time they show up here at age 18. And so certainly when you talk about FERPA and parents, and you would sort of think about that time when they may be under 18 and may be living at home. And so it seems to contemplate some sort of parental involvement in that process. And I know as a parent, I would certainly think it'd be nice to be able to have access to my children as they're receiving all this stuff to kind of help them sift through legitimate opportunities and things that may be less attractive for them. I would note that our students, all of our students, somehow survive after the 11th day, right? After the 11th day and the 98% that allow their information to become public, the university still sends those students important messages. They still send them updates. They still send them alerts and so on, and yet somehow they're able to interact, right? I think it may be a little bit overstated to suggest that people are going to be so overwhelmed by this stuff that that we somehow have to protect them. It's a little bit like, it's a close, I shouldn't say close, but it is at least a distant cousin of the free speech argument, that do we really want to protect people from ideas that we might not care about or might not care for? I mean, fundamentally, at some point, they're going to, at the 11th day of their freshman year, they're going to have to deal with this because they're going to start getting applications for credit cards on their email. So being at that point, my preference as we go forward is to identify a period that's early enough in the process that we are complying with the law, and that we are not, the minute somebody applies, we don't put their name out there, but actually when somebody actually has made some confirmation that they're going to be attending, that at that point in time their information would, at their choosing, by not suppressing, would be available to start receiving material. I would ask one last question after my soliloquy here. Is it possible for students at that stage, let's say if it's at the May 1st stage or whatever, to offer them a limited, it's almost kind of turning the suppression question on its head, where you're actually offering them the opportunity to allow their information to be provided to student organizations on campus. That way, you aren't necessarily opening the floodgates. Is that something anybody's ever contemplated? And then at some point in time, we would, fall into this broader context of people having to, so it's kind of the negative checkoff versus the positive checkoff. Something that, where there's a positive checkoff, if you want information about student organizations and other opportunities at the university, you can make yourself available. And then for the broader group, at a certain point in time, you would actually have to choose to suppress as we comply with these laws.
Answer?
Chair Lucas, Regent Rocha, I think I can get to that question. The answer, and I think Stacy might want to contribute to this, would be, because I can't comment in the legal domain here. That's why I have colleagues at the table. I don't see any reason you couldn't do that, is for internal kinds of emails to be able to push those out. I would not agree with your position of pushing them out at the confirmation date, because I think the confirmation date is still pretty fluid for students. The earliest that I would be comfortable with would be at orientation, when they've shown up here and they're actually engaged in the campus life, and then hold off until, or for the external release of the directory until the 10th day, but I'm not sure whether we're drawing a fine line here.
Thank you, Chair Lucas, Regent Rocha. What I would briefly add to that is that part of this, I think, would turn on how we've defined our public and directory information in the Regents policy, and so there may be discretion there to change that default, if you will, and which information defaults as public. Right now, how that works in our MyU system is to essentially follow that policy of having it public as designated until a student exercises that opportunity to suppress.
Good.
Please.
Chair Lucas, Regent Rocha, the gold standard under the state and federal laws for release of student record information is really consent. So if a student consents to the release of the data, then it's permissible to release it. And so, you know, if the university were to ask students, would you like to consent to us sharing your information either in whole or in part with certain specific groups, and if a student did in fact consent, then I believe we'd be allowed to share that information. And in fact, I think we do that to some degree right now with certain student organizations or other university activities, and we do share contact information for students who indicate that they're interested in receiving that information.
Okay, I have Student Representative Dice.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. And I just have a really simple clarification before I ask my question, and that is, so, and maybe you'll be confused why I'm asking this question because I'm a student, I should know this, is that I go to the Morris campus, and obviously it's a smaller town, we have less businesses and things like that. So my question is, are students, for example, on the Twin Cities campus or in the Duluth campus, getting emails not only from internally, like you said, from clubs and organizations and things like that, but also externally, like from restaurants and things like that, like promotional things? It sounds like yes.
Yes, Chair Lucas, Representative Dice, that is correct. The rules are essentially the same for all of our campuses. I will say that in terms of the public records requests that I become aware of in my role, more of them have been asking for Twin Cities data. That might just be a matter of awareness or, you know, proximity to interested businesses, but definitely those requests are made for students on other campuses. I just don't see them quite as frequently.
Right, then follow-up question, Regent Lucas?
Yes, please.
Okay, well then, yeah, that answers my question. Then obviously, I mean, then on the Morris campus, I mean, I'm not getting promotional emails from Subway or, you know, something like that. So, but I can definitely see where, when Regent Beeson made his comment about how that would be a distraction to students and why they would want to have that ability to filter, you know, I don't want to get promotional emails from Subway. I want to get things about clubs and organizations and things like that. I can definitely see, and where Regent Rocha made that comment as well of kind of, well, I don't want to get all these things that are constantly filtering or clouding my email. I can definitely understand that as a student. But then, and this goes to the part of where you said at the very, very beginning of your presentation that students are learning about the process of suppressing their data through a variety of ways, but I have never been exposed to that kind of information of how to do that. And so that is my question at the baseline, I guess, of how do students, or how are students expected to learn about, or how do you, like, in your department, release that information of how to do that to students? Just because it clearly maybe isn't happening as effectively as you would like, because I haven't heard of that, or maybe other students. I mean, I don't, you know, so I don't know how broad that lack of information is, but I just, you know, I'm just curious as to how students get to know about that.
Yeah, if I may, Chair Lucas, Representative Dice, that's an excellent question. You bring up an issue that we spend time thinking about. As you might remember, that period leading up to when you show up for classes, there is a fair bit of information. And when students start participating in our various system varies a little bit. Some students are activating their email very early on after they've confirmed. Others do that at a later time. Often students' first real interaction with our MyU system, where you can make those choices, really truly happens at orientation when you're registering. And students who poke around, if you will, in MyU, go to the MyInfo tab and see directory suppression, what's this, and click on it. That would be a passive way of learning about that. The institution publishes information on how this works, on how you can suppress your information, on where your information goes. We publish it in a variety of ways. It's on our one-stop website. It's in our university catalogs website. We do make it a part of the Gopher Guide. It's also part of orientation materials and the published gold book that students receive at orientation. That being said, we are deeply sympathetic to the fact that often those phases can be fire hoses of information, if you will. You're learning about services like we just heard about from the Disability Resources Center, where to receive counseling services, getting a hold of your campus maps, figuring out how to get from one dorm to the next building. There's a lot to learn. And I think the data privacy stuff, although I dearly love it, can be a little on the dull side, perhaps, at times. So, the students do learn about it in a variety of ways. Recognizing this particular issue, we did start this past summer, partially in response to what we heard at that March 2018 student report to the board. We began sending an email to the students in late summer after they had enrolled in classes, informing them that they did have directory information and providing them a link to resources on how to change their settings if they cared to. Probably, I would have to verify whether that's happening on all of our campuses or not. And then also for you personally, that would probably be a matter of timing since you weren't a new student this summer.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. Thank you, presenters. I just want to point out that we have the smartest students ever attending the university now. And they know how to deal with email. And I have never heard any student, except for right now, complain about receiving email, spam or otherwise, because there are all sorts of ways to deal with that we all know about. But I want to discuss specifically some of the parts of the presentation here. Having been involved in this for a number of years, probably close to 10 years with the current system, it's my understanding that emails are generated, email addresses are generated when a person applies. And they're activated when they actually confirm they're attending and they show up for orientation. And it's at that point that they're told that they can suppress their information. But this system, I don't know when we put it in, but I think it was probably in the 90s. We started with Google way back when. Automatically populates the directory once somebody shows up for orientation and activates their email address, thereby creating an online directory that is in real time populating students as being students. And that's where the information has been in the past given to Greek organizations and other organizations who request the data after an orientation. And so I don't necessarily agree with what you have in here in terms of what the current practice is, because the current practice actually just provides the information to the online directory when they attend and activate their email addresses. And I don't have a problem with that, although I would argue that when you send out something that says, send us $200 to confirm your enrollment, I think most people believe they're actually enrolled when they send you the $200, which would then, be the definition of enrollment that we should use instead of the one that you have in here, which is, you're enrolled after you attend your 10th day of classes or whatever, and then we'll figure out, whether or not we should provide your information. So I understand that there's a desire by some in the organization to want to protect students from email, but I really don't think it's legitimate because these are adults and they're students who can suppress, but yet they don't in most cases. Now, this whole suppression discussion is a very interesting discussion because you can suppress different pieces of your information. I think you can even suppress your entire name, from what I understand. But let's get back to the fact that a student that doesn't suppress, I think we have to just assume that they're willing to get whatever email, whatever anybody sends them in email. And if we could change it to actually allow people to opt in or whatever when they apply, and a lot of schools do this. They actually have it on their application or their, even when you request information from the school before, when you're still in high school, you can request that certain student groups be allowed to contact you. We don't offer any of that, but I think if you get to that level of operations, then I think you avoid some of these other topics about students complaining about getting outside email. But it is public data, and we have to recognize that. And I think trying to suppress it on behalf of the students is the wrong approach because they are adults and they're here to learn how to, deal with the world outside the university while they're here. And I think we should just let them do that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Regent Powell, you have something? Oh.
Chair Lucas and Regent Hsu, I appreciate what you're saying. I do hear from students that they're frustrated with the volume of email that they get, and that it's hard for them to pick out the critical messages from the university. That's not every student at the university, but I hear this on a regular basis. It seems as though one strategy moving forward would in fact be to go to the student senate and other student groups and have a conversation about what they're comfortable with, and get the holistic response from them in terms of their sense of how they want to be communicated with and when.
Okay. Follow up quick. 3:05 is sort of our time to have a break.
I'll just quickly say that, I think the other people want to be in this discussion and we should discuss it with them. But in terms of complying with what we're doing today, which I assume someone in the general counsel's office back in 1993 or 1995 looked at this precise issue, and now we're trying to, have a discussion to reevaluate it. But I believe we've been following all the laws up until this point. And one point I was going to make earlier is that there are people who have taken their own interpretation in hand, and changes have been made to the system over time. In fact, this summer there was a problem apparently where students registering were not showing up when they were supposed to show up in the system. So I don't know what happened with that, but it was noticed, and I'm not sure how they got it fixed eventually. But I think the way that it's working is fine for now, and unless there's a reason to change it, it's just not, to me, worth the effort of actually messing around with it now.
Okay, Regent Powell.
Very quickly, thank you, Chair Lucas. This is sort of a tangential question, but I guess I'm in this conversation, one of the things I'm most struck by is the melt. And I'm just wondering, Vice Provost, if you can give us a little, have we studied that 7%? And is it really students that just wanted to keep a couple of options open to the very, very end? Or, do we know primarily what that's all about?
Yeah. Chair Lucas and Regent Powell, that's a national trend, of course. That's not unique to the University of Minnesota. And we've actually noticed over the last decade the MELT percentage going down. It used to be higher, around 10%, and it's narrowed to 7%. Absolutely, these are students who have gone into the summer thinking they weren't still certain what direction they wanted to go, and they have 2 or 3 options, and in the end they select one and the other 2 are out of luck. that's part of it. The other part would be students who have decided over the summer they're going to delay their attendance and withdraw their confirmation and probably come back to college the next year because they're not quite ready. Thank you.
Could I just quick ask, the students that melt, have they already committed any kind of deposit?
Yes, they have. They've committed their confirmation fee, and they do not get that back, of course.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
One more regent, Regent Johnson I have.
I'll pass.
You're next. You're passed, okay, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regent Powell, over half of those people have received emails from some other campus or other college and got excited about the organizations they could get involved with and have chosen to go there instead of the university. I mean, I don't know. That number doesn't shock me to the extent that, you know, we lose students between year one and year two.
Yes,
you know, lives change and choices change and so on. But to the extent that 7% would be receiving correspondence, it really hurts nothing. I mean, I think it would tend to, again, get people engaged in it. I'm not really sure where we're going from here. I do appreciate the conversation. Are we going to be?
The intent for today is to talk about the options, and then we will take it up for a policy recommendation later.
Very good. And then that's what I was going to say, because this is a little, I mean, again, it kind of almost comes off as proving a negative in a way. We don't really have something in front of us. And you know, I'm inclined to, again, to recognize people's opportunity. I'm a little bit concerned about this idea that we're going to ask a group of, a group of students. I want that feedback, but you can certainly understand that we're talking about people's access to things. And the students that you say that you talk to that are so frustrated, I hope that you realize you can suppress that information and the problem will go away for you if you don't want to receive it. It's not as though that somehow having a policy where we have an earlier date is going to put people through this, horrifying experience for 4 years. If it turns out that they're getting more than they want at any time, they can suppress, if I'm understanding correctly. But I still think that it's remarkable that, somebody that cheats on a quiz on their third day of classes is going to be held to our code of conduct because they're enrolled and attending that class. The fact that they simply can't get, they can still get a refund doesn't mean that they're not enrolled. And so, to the extent that we're making a legal analysis, and I think that the General Counsel did a nice job, I would like to, certainly be a part of putting something together that this board can really evaluate and at least, address this issue for until the next time it comes back up. So I appreciate the work that you all done.
Okay, I've got one more, Regent Anderson.
I was just going to say thank you, Chair Lucas. I somewhat agree with Regent Rocha and we ate lunch with students today, and Vice Provost McMaster was at my table, and knowing that this was coming up, I asked some of these students, what about your email? And I think you were listening. Some of them, I'm going to paraphrase, they say, if it's something about dance clubs, I want to get all the emails in the world because I want to know they're out there. But if it's like buying athletic tickets or getting deals at Subway, I don't want any of them. So I really think we are on a balance where the kids, the students, they do want to know of what you're doing. I think there's data out there that the kids, I'm guessing that our suppression suppresses everything, where maybe we can qualify advertisements, offers, clubs by dance, all this, and kids only get what they've asked for. That might be just something to think about, because those techniques are being done with our foundation and our alumni groups. Yeah. Those same types of things.
I think the point here is, what information do students get and when do they get it? And I think it would be worth working through a
Would you agree that that's different for every student, what they prefer?
I would assume so.
That's just my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. This has been a good discussion. We'll come back to it someday, and you have earned a 12-minute break. Please be back at 3:20.
Oh, boy.
3:20. 10 minutes.
Do I introduce you? No.
Okay. Okay, our very short break is over, but I'm sure we all have nourishment. So we now have the opportunity to have a very rich discussion on graduate and professional education. This is the second part of discussion that we've agreed to have, and this is focusing on key aspects and challenges. So I'm going to turn it over to Provost Hanson, and you can help us take it away.
Thank you, Chair Lucas, and members of the committee. As the chair mentioned, we're continuing a discussion that was begun in September on post-baccalaureate education, with a focus on how a number of key issues, in particular academic planning, enrollment management, and financing, are managed by faculty and academic staff. If you recall last month's conversation, post-baccalaureate students comprise a quarter of all students enrolled on the Twin Cities, Duluth, and Rochester campuses. Remember, too, the distinction we drew between graduate and professional education, and that distinction was grounded on different curricular constraints and academic aims and expectations. This broad general distinction will once again be relevant in today's discussions. Do we have the slides up, actually? Okay. To quickly review, traditional graduate degrees are those where a major portion of the program involves research or creative activity. Those programs are listed in the left column of this slide, PhD degree, for example, and most of the Masters of Science and Masters of Arts programs. The group of professional degrees on the right includes those programs whose graduates most often seek applied professional or practice-based employment in the fields named in the degrees, such as doctorates in medicine, law, or dentistry, and many professional master's degrees, such as Master of Architecture, Master of Social Work, Master of Public Affairs, Master of Education, Master of Public Health. And that's just a set of examples. Well, this reminder of the basic post-baccalaureate distinction is in front of us. We turn to the two basic sides of today's presentations. Scott Lanyon is back with us, the Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education, to speak about academic planning, enrollment management, and financial issues related to graduate education. And then when Scott concludes, I'll speak briefly again about professional education and introduce three professors who will address the same range of topics: academic planning, enrollment management, and finances, as well as a few more issues pertinent to their particular sector of professional education. So slide 3, Scott.
Thank you very much, Provost Hanson, Chair Lucas, members of the committee. So there were 4 topics that we decided at our September meeting that we might touch on today. Provost has just introduced those very briefly. First, it's sort of what's involved in proposing new or perhaps closing existing graduate programs. What are graduate enrollment targets, or how are they set? How is graduate education financed? And then I also want to touch on some of the key issues, some of the key challenges facing graduate education today, both at the University of Minnesota and nationally. So as we mentioned at the September meeting, graduate education is very decentralized relative to undergraduate education. While the formation of new programs and the closure of existing programs ultimately requires approval by the provost and by this body, the initial decision whether to pursue the formation of a new program or to consider closing an existing program really is done at the local level. And there are a number of issues or factors that faculty consider. The first is current employer interest, student interest in a new program or an existing program, and also their own assessment of the evolution and expansion of their disciplines and the likelihood of significant advances that might result in major changes in both employer and student interest. And so a recommendation for a new program could be driven by any one or some combination of these 3 factors. And the reverse is true for closing programs. So there could be declining employer interest, declining student interest, as exemplified by a lower number of applications, and frequently a declining faculty interest as faculty become interested in other parts of the discipline or intersections with other disciplines. And so the conclusion can be, again, through some combination of these factors to recommend program closure. So it's a decision that's made locally, then recommended to the provost, and ultimately to the Board of Regents. Enrollment management, similarly, is a very, very local sort of thing. You've discussed it at some length with the provost and Vice Provost McMaster, undergraduate enrollment and enrollment management. And you understand that it's essential with undergraduate enrollment that we set targets at the campus level. And that's because there are a series of campus-wide services upon which undergraduate education depends. For example, the undergraduate population is dictated by our student housing capacity, our advising capacity, financial aid, capacity for summer orientation, and access to gateway courses such as calculus or chemistry. And there are no equivalent campus-wide, campus-level limiting factors in graduate education. Instead, the limiting factors are local. Availability of faculty advisors, teaching and research assistant positions, capacity in core courses and disciplines, all very local. So when faculty and administrators are determining enrollment targets for individual programs, they're really looking at some combination of these 7 factors. And taking these together, looking at the growth and sustainability programs attempt to set goals. Now, on this slide, I've listed these 7. The actual importance of each varies quite substantially between different graduate programs and different disciplines. So last month, Regent McMillan emphasized the vital linkage between graduate education and our undergraduate education mission, and indeed the entire tripartite mission of the University of Minnesota. And this linkage is reflected here by this sort of teaching assistant demand component. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to address an issue that Regent Hsu pointed out at our last meeting. You indicated a concern about international graduate students serving as TAs and indicated that when you were in school, you sometimes encountered teaching assistants whose English language skills were questionable, and you were interested in knowing where we are with that today. So I wanted to tell you that all students who are not native speakers of English are required to demonstrate English language proficiency before they're eligible to serve as TAs. And we use the spoken English language or spoken English test for teaching assistants to assess proficiency. Test measures spoken English pronunciation, fluency, grammar, and vocabulary, as well as listening comprehension. If students aren't found to be proficient, then they're required to take 1 or more courses that have been explicitly designed for this purpose, and then they must again demonstrate proficiency before they would be approved to teach. Graduate students are also critical to our success in relation to research. And so that points to this last factor here on this slide, faculty capacity or need. For some graduate programs, the maximum enrollment is dictated by the number of graduate students the faculty feel that they can advise effectively. There's a very close relationship between advisor and advisee in graduate education. It's also true that for some programs, a minimum enrollment is sometimes dictated by faculty need for collaborators. In many disciplines, graduate students are critically important members of faculty research teams. And while this varies dramatically between disciplines, I've looked at the CVs of faculty recently considered for promotion at the University of Minnesota, and graduate students were co-authors on over half of faculty publications. Co-authorship, if you're not familiar with it, in this case means that those graduate students have been very heavily involved in either the creation of the initial question, collecting data, analyzing and interpreting data, and writing, and so on. Turning to the third question or topic that everyone wished to look at today, and that is the issue of financing of graduate education. And I'd like you to recall this figure that I showed in September. This was an attempt to distinguish how our post-baccalaureate students spend their time here at the university between spending time mastering existing knowledge, so the students in the upper left are spending the majority of their time mastering existing knowledge, and students on the lower right are spending the majority of their time either creating or communicating new knowledge. Well, this figure actually is helpful in thinking about how we finance graduate education as well. So if you think about master's students are spending a lot of time in courses. Again, I'm talking about research master's students here. But nearly half of our master's students in any one semester are actually employed as research assistants or teaching assistants, helping us to accomplish that part of our mission. And they're receiving stipends, obviously, in return for that. Our PhD students, much further along in this process of becoming involved in generating new knowledge and communicating new knowledge, so a significantly higher percentage are on either research assistantships or teaching assistantships. I'll also point out that sort of upper right pie there, I'm not sure what blue color that is, but that would indicate fellowships. And so a significant fraction of our PhD candidates are being successful at acquiring either internal fellowships or external fellowships. Also at our last meeting, Regent Hsu wondered whether we were making competitive offers when we're talking about financing graduate education, and especially when we're attempting to attract the very best students. So I wanted to show you in this bar chart here, this is an opportunity for students to identify the main reasons that they chose to come to the University of Minnesota, and obviously they could choose multiple reasons. But amongst the top 5 reasons given for why students chose to come to the University of Minnesota in their graduate program is, in fact, financial support. Now, unfortunately, to Regent Hsu's question, we have heard from many of our programs that when they do lose their top prospects, it is frequently to institutions that have offered more lucrative packages. For several years now, because of this, the provost has actually made additional funds available to colleges specifically to enhance offers that are made to the very best students. Now, the final point I'd like to make in this area of financing a graduate education is about student debt, a concern I believe Regent Cohen mentioned at our last meeting. First, it's important to point out that students with high levels of debt at the conclusion of their undergraduate career are simply less likely to pursue a graduate degree. And there's reason to believe that student debt, therefore, is an additional barrier to all of our efforts to increase diversity in graduate education as well. But we do have some data about debt of graduate students. This data comes from the National Science Foundation. It's only for people receiving doctorate degrees. But what this shows is about 3/4 of students receiving doctorates in 2016 had acquired no additional debt while they were graduate students. Okay? That corresponds well with the fact that a high percentage of our doctoral students are supported here as TAs or RAs, helping us to accomplish our mission. All right. So then the last section of my presentation is really about some of these key issues that we are facing in graduate education, both at the University of Minnesota and nationally. And it's important to keep in mind as I talk about these that I'm going to talk about these sort of these key pieces, but they all are in the guise of helping us accomplish our main goal, which is to achieve greater productivity and quality in our scholarship. That's the main driver for graduate education. So with that in mind, one of the key issues is diversity, increasing the diversity of students receiving graduate degrees. We believe that the key issue we need to address in order to advance the quality of our scholarship at the university is, in fact, to increase diversity. We recognize that the quality and value of University of Minnesota scholarship depends on the diversity of views and experiences of the people who do that scholarship. Problems that seem intractable and questions that seem unanswerable to a homogeneous group of individuals can frequently be solved by a group that's diverse. You frequently hear people talking about thinking outside the box. The most effective way to think outside the box is to partner with somebody whose life experiences, values, hopes, and concerns are very different than your own. Now, it's important to emphasize that when we talk about increasing diversity, we aren't talking solely about recruitment. The last thing we want to do is to convince people to come to Minnesota for their graduate education only to expose them to a climate that's unwelcoming and not inclusive. So this then brings up our second key issue in graduate education, which is climate. We know that nationally, institutions are dealing with hate speech and other less extreme but no less impactful ways in which people can be unwelcoming to people unlike themselves. It's important that we take steps to ensure that our climate is as welcoming to students from diverse backgrounds and experiences as it can be. The first step is to understand the climate on our own campus. And our primary tool in graduate education to accomplish this is a survey called GradSeru. And so I'd like to explain briefly what that is. You may be familiar with SERUs. This is a survey of the experiences of undergraduate students at a research university that's been around for many years, and Vice Provost McMaster and his team have used that extensively. GradSeru was only recently developed to do the same thing for graduate students. And as of now, we've only started this in 2017, was the first time it was administered here and at a few other institutions. But half of the Big Ten institutions have or soon will implement GradSeru on their campuses, so we'll have great comparative data. Note, as I'm about to talk about some of the results of GradSeru in talking about climate and so on, students at the University of Minnesota Duluth did not actually participate in the 2017 administration of GradSeru for technical reasons, but next spring we will be administering again, and that will be to all graduate students in the system. So what does GradSeru tell us about our climate? So a very high percentage of graduate students responded favorably to these 4 climate statements. 92% responded favorably to faculty respect students regardless of their background. 94% said that students respect other students regardless of their background. 89% faculty encourage expression of diverse viewpoints from their students. And overall, the environment or climate at the University of Minnesota is positive and welcoming. Now, it's important to remember that these figures are for the campus as a whole. Again, this is Twin Cities data this year. And that is, in fact, the way most institutions collect this kind of data. It's at the campus level, and that's the way it's reported. But remember what I started off by saying, which is graduate education is extremely decentralized. Most of the decisions on how to improve graduate education have to be made locally. So we really need local data, program level data, in order to truly evaluate how we're doing in the space of climate and other aspects of graduate education. So here are the same questions, but here what I'm showing you is the range of the percent favorable responses by graduate program. All right, so we have, I'll go to the extreme right, even though the response rates for the campus are very positive, the responses are very positive about the overall climate being positive and welcoming, we do have graduate programs where that's clearly not the case. All right? So having this information allows us to begin to educate graduate programs about what graduate students are experiencing so that changes can be implemented. Note that as you look at this, though, that we're not a very diverse campus. Only about 20% of our domestic graduate students are American Indian or students of color. So that means these results that you're looking at are primarily the experiences of majority students. So we'll be administering this GradSeru survey again in spring 2019. Now, one specific concern regarding climate with which graduate schools nationally are struggling is the occasional disconnect between the career aspirations faculty have for their students and the careers that their students actually want to pursue. I mention this in the context of climate because if a program is only interested in training students to be faculty, then the climate can be unwelcoming and unsupportive for students interested in other career paths. So what does GradSeru tell us? So if you look at master's students, about 61%, oh, and I should point out, each one of these dots here represents the percent positive responses of a different college at the University of Minnesota. So you can see there's some differences across the campus, but about 61% for the campus as a whole are interested in pursuing a faculty position. All right? And I've referred to this before, that increasingly a larger and larger fraction of graduate students are interested in other kinds of careers. Well, I'm happy to say that those same students reported that their programs are quite supportive of different kinds of career paths, non-academic career paths, as shown here in the bottom, right? There's a range from some colleges, the students saying that only 62% or so of the students felt that the program was supportive, all the way up to about 96%. PhD students have a different perspective. PhD students, you might not be surprised to learn, a higher percentage of them are interested in pursuing a faculty career. And I should say in all of these cases, that's not the only career that students are interested in, but they would like to keep the door open to think about pursuing a faculty career. But the students don't see their program as being particularly supportive in many cases. All right, so we have a disconnect. And so this is an opportunity using data like this, which is a great opportunity for students to provide feedback anonymously to programs that the programs can then use to affect change. This diversity of career paths of interest to students raises our third key point, and it's a point raised by Regent Simonson last month, the importance of preparing graduate students for diverse career paths. So I mentioned this idea, the idea of T-shaped education. Increasingly, graduate education is attempting to provide graduate students not just with great deep disciplinary knowledge, but also with interdisciplinary skills and also with many of the transferable skills that will allow them to be successful in whatever career path they pursue. So the graduate school is currently in the process of summarizing the professional development opportunities that exist at the university and to lower any barriers that discourage graduate students from participating in those opportunities. Now, with increasing diversity as an issue, concerns about climate, the challenges inherent in trying to prepare for a diversity of careers, some of which don't exist yet, it shouldn't be a surprise that our fourth key issue in graduate education is stress and mental health. Now, as we heard earlier today, Disability Resource Center is very active in addressing mental health issues. Today, I'll focus primarily on one aspect, which is stress, which is a significant mental health issue for graduate students. When thinking about stress, it's important to recognize that there are two fundamentally different forms of stress, often referred to as good stress and bad stress. Good stress is an essential part of accomplishing great things. In graduate school, it most often results from intellectual challenges that are difficult to overcome, challenges that are an essential part of creating new knowledge and developing innovative ideas. Good stress helps students to become successful scholars. Bad stress are typically things that are ongoing, chronic, things that hinder a student's ability to accomplish their goals. In graduate school, bad stress results from such things as financial, food, and housing insecurity, I should say, discrimination, microaggression, an unwelcoming climate. Issues that are largely out of students' control and impact daily performance. So I'm going to show you another result from GradSeru. I'm sort of helping you see all the potentials of some of the survey tools that we use at the University of Minnesota. So in this case, what you see is the dots represent the responses of different universities. University of Minnesota shown in brown. And the first thing to notice here for these various issues in mental health space is that the universities are all responding very, very similarly. But about 10% of University of Minnesota graduate students reported that they experienced little interest or pleasure in doing things and feeling down, depressed, or hopeless for more than half the days or nearly every day in the 2 weeks preceding the survey. The second two lines there, 15% of our students report that they feel nervous, anxious, or on edge and are unable to stop worrying for more than half the days or nearly every day. Remember, graduate students are expected to do research, to generate ideas and concepts, to solve problems that no one has ever done before. They're not easy things to do. And if you're feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, or unable to stop worrying, it's nearly impossible. Well, one way we can reduce bad stress is to provide faculty with tools so they can be as effective at advising as possible, so that they can help eliminate sources of bad stress when possible and can help their students to develop coping mechanisms to deal with bad stress. Therefore, the relationship between faculty advisor and graduate students is our final key issue. This relationship is so important in graduate education that it's difficult to imagine making any changes without involving advisors. With increased expectations placed on faculty, all of the issues that I've just mentioned this afternoon, plus the teaching that's expected of faculty, the need for and difficulty in finding research support, the expectation that they become leaders in their disciplines and staying on the cutting edge of disciplines that are advancing at a phenomenal pace, the opportunity for there to be stress in the advisor-advisee relationship has never been greater. So it's a place that we are working as a graduate school. GradSeru is a great way to begin to learn about this relationship from the student's perspective. And the good news, once again, is, in general, at the campus level, students are quite satisfied with the advising they're getting. 88% say their advisor is able to effectively help them. 81%, my advisor provides me with the information that helps me think about my career. 96% say that their advisor respects them as an individual. 87% my advisor has a reputation of being a good advisor. But again, that's campus level. I'll just once again show you that there's a range. So there's room for improvement in the area of advising. And we're working to develop an advising toolkit that will help faculty become more effective and more efficient as advisors. The toolkit will include best practices in general, but will also emphasize the issues I've raised today: diversity, climate, career diversity, and graduate student mental health. Now, I'd like to actually talk about these 5 issues. There are many issues, initiatives that we are working on to address them. But remember that we're very decentralized. Graduate education is decentralized. So you won't be surprised that all of the initiatives we're working on are in concert with colleges and graduate programs. It's interesting to point out that one of our initiatives, providing faculty with tools to help them be effective as advisors, was highlighted yesterday in the Chronicle of Higher Education. To close, I just want to address several additional questions that were raised in last month's meeting. Regent Hsu asked how we are doing with respect to increasing the diversity of students receiving graduate degrees. And this question was partially addressed in your docket materials for today, but I just wanted to come back to it and point out that we did experience a decline. The percent of enrolled domestic students not identifying as white dropped from 2008 to 2015, but since 2015-16, that percentage has increased by nearly 8%. Today, approximately 20% of graduate students identify as non-white, while nationally that percentage of doctor recipients, that's the best data we have, last year for students identifying as non-white was 25%. So we still have work to do. But keep in mind that people aged 20 to 30 in the U.S. identifying as non-white comprise about 47% of the population. Regent Cohen asked how we compared with other Big Ten institutions, so I thought I would give you a little bit of information here. The best data we have, again, nationally has to do with awarding PhDs. The University of Minnesota in 2016 awarded the 5th most PhDs nationally, 3rd in the Big Ten. And I thought you might be interested in seeing how we compare across various disciplines. And so here, that same data is broken down by number of PhDs, our national rank, again, in the number of PhDs in that particular area, as well as our rank within the Big Ten. And I'll conclude by just reminding you of our presentation schedule. In December, we'll be talking about the role of graduate students in advancing knowledge and research, impacts to the state, nation, and the world, and student success outcomes. And I also want to point out, in that space, Regent Cohen, you had expressed interest in learning more about time to degree, and we'll talk about it in that section. And the real fun thing in December will be we'll have some students here presenting their 3-minute thesis, which is always a great fun. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues, actually to Provost Hanson.
Scott has emphasized a number of the things where he's looking at the details of variances across the various programs that he oversees, but he also was able to address a range of key issues across graduate education broadly, because there are many similarities among our graduate programs. And actually, of course, not just among our graduate programs, but across graduate research programs across the U.S. There are some differences in planning, enrollment management, and finances, of course, as well as in some of these other things about climate, as Scott has noted, but commonalities such as the graduate tuition rate or typical program milestones such as prelims and the advancement to candidacy and the dissertation allow us to consider the graduate education programs together as one group for the purposes of this discussion. It's much harder to make generalizations about professional education because of the heterogeneous nature of the programs. For example, tuition level for programs such as the Master of Education or the Master of Public Policy here and across the country are much different from the tuition levels for, say, medicine or law. There are also significant differences program to program, field to field, in degree requirements, structure or shape of the student experiences, and the typical number of years required for degree completion. These differences not only make it harder, but mostly, in fact, useless to try to generalize across the programs. Given that, today's presentation will simply highlight 2 specific programs in each of 2 different colleges, and rather than speak to professional education as a whole, my 3 colleagues will discuss planning and key issues related to their particular professional programs. In the College of Education and Human Development, we've invited Professor Deborah Dillon, Associate Dean for Graduate and Professional Programs, and her colleague, Professor Joe, is it Mariki? Mariki. They are joined then by Professor Craig Hedberg in the School of Public Health. And before I turn to these colleagues, I want to note just one more thing. I've emphasized that many differences that make generalizing across professional education largely inappropriate. But it is worth mentioning that there are some professional education issues that are of great concern to many professional programs, and they overlap with some of the things that Scott was just mentioning. But one important thing is the programs are all concerned about debt-to-income ratios as they work to figure tuition rates for their programs. All programs have an interest in recruiting and retaining diverse student bodies, though what this may mean operationally may be different for different programs. Some may feel most acutely the need to increase racial diversity in the profession. Some may also want to increase gender diversity, and that may mean either increasing the number of men or the number of women, and so on. Again, all of it depends on the field and its history. And finally, many professional programs wrestle, as the whole university does, with providing support for the well-being and mental health of students. In the case of post-baccalaureate students, however, we know that many of them are balancing family or other responsibilities with a rigorous academic schedule. We touched on this briefly in the docket. Scott has mentioned it for graduate students. Our presenters will comment on some of these issues as well. So I turn to my colleagues, beginning with Professor Dillon and Professor Marigi.
Chair Lucas, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I will start off by providing some information about enrollment in the College of Education and Human Development, and then turn specifically to the Master of Social Work program, of which I'm a part. In the College of Education and Human Development, there are more than 2,300 graduate and professional students. This number makes up approximately 1/2 of the student population in the college. Something that we're very proud of in the College of Education and Human Development is the fact that we have a fairly large population of students of color. We have approximately 20% of our students identify as students of color. The programs in the college there are 40 graduate and professional program areas that we cover, and social work is one of those programs, which I will turn to now. I wanted to provide you with just a very quick overview of social work because oftentimes people have perceptions of social work that are partial. The profession of social work as a whole offers a wide range of career opportunities for master's level practitioners. And some of these key areas include children, families, and schools, healthcare, mental health and substance abuse, policy and community advocacy, among others. And in the United States, there are more than 680,000 social workers. And when we look at specifically at Minnesota, we have 15,000 social workers. One thing that I would like to point out that social workers comprise the largest group of mental health providers in the nation. So it's a vital program not only for Minnesota, but for the nation as a whole. The Bureau of Labor Statistics last year reported that job growth in social work looks very good. They anticipate a 16% job growth specifically for the social work profession. This compares to a 7% growth for other professionals. The increase projected in terms of total number of jobs approaches 110,000 jobs between 2016 and 2017. This is an exciting time for social work because of the very positive job prospects. Now, there are specific needs in the community for social workers to attend to, especially in educational programs. We need to train individuals who can deliver culturally appropriate services, but also services that address behavioral health, gerontology, and trauma-informed care.
The School of Social Work is 100 years old this year. Last year we had our centennial, and it was a very exciting time for us. We have graduated nearly 5,000 master's degrees since the first degree was offered in 1918. And in 2016-17, we graduated 131 MSW students. And again, we are very pleased to report that 34% of our students who graduated are students of color. And as you probably could have guessed, it is a gendered profession, so the large majority of our students identify as female. Now, there are some key strengths to our social work program which can tie to enrollment. We are the only MSW program in the state of Minnesota that is part of a research-intensive university. There are 7 other MSW programs, but we are the one that's housed in a research-intensive environment. We also offer 4 concentration options. They are clinical mental health, health, disability and aging, families and children, and community practice. Oftentimes, MSW programs will offer 1 or 2 concentrations, most commonly clinical mental health and families and children. We're really proud of the fact that we've developed a health, disability, and aging concentration because it makes us very unique in the marketplace. We also have the benefit of partnerships with more than 200 community agencies that provide outstanding environments for our students to be trained in Minnesota. And also our pass rate for the licensure exam within the first year of graduation exceeds 90%. Together, all of these strengths are appealing to students who are looking for a master's degree program, and it makes us rather competitive in the environment. While there are strengths with the program, there are also challenges for our students, and they've been highlighted previously. Financial aid and tuition disparities that exist are some of the key barriers that we experience that can have an influence on enrollment. As you can probably imagine, the majority of our students are required to take out student loans and many times work at least 1 part-time job, sometimes 2 part-time jobs, in order to afford their education. The School of Social Work does offer financial aid through foundation funds, and with these funds, we're able to support 40% of our students with an average award of approximately $7,000. But one of the key issues for us, and something that we think about often, is the tuition disparity between part-time and full-time students. For our full-time students who have the opportunity to take off 2 years to do our master's degree program, their approximate tuition cost is $34,000. For someone who's maybe has family responsibilities or has a job and can't leave their job, their tuition cost to do our master's degree program approaches $70,000, which is a disincentive. And it's something that we think about because we, as a professional program, we like to attract people with life experience, people who have worked in various communities in different capacities to come to our program because that enriches the education we provide. We often don't get students who go immediately from undergraduate to graduate. In fact, we tend to discourage that a bit. We want our students to have real life experience and then come to the program. And so that becomes a challenge for us. And the student debt, when you look at the national average, the mean salary for social workers, which is slightly below $48,000 a year, the debt they incur to get their program and then the prospect of getting high-paying salaries is not really possible. And in fact, many of our students say that they don't come to social work because they want to make a lot of money. They do it because they're passionate about the work. And another concern that we have is the increasing number of online MSW programs that we're seeing around the nation. So, even with the challenges, the School of Social Work is very dedicated to responding to the needs of the state of Minnesota. And recently, in 2014, we received a grant from a federal agency to develop an integrated behavioral health program because integrated behavioral health in particular, is something that is greatly needed in the state and across the country. And this program helped train the grant-funded program, helped train 90 students. I directed the program and I wrote the grant to develop this program. We had the good fortune to support 90 students with $900,000 worth of funding to take part in a tailored curriculum and an experience so that they could help fill a critical workforce gap in Minnesota, and that is to be a behavioral health practitioner. Since the grant ended, we are now able to fund a smaller cohort of students every year, and as of last year, we graduated 103 students from this program. And we have officially integrated this curriculum into our MSW degree. We view this as a way to create a pipeline to fill the behavioral health provider gap in Minnesota, and it's something that we're very invested in. And this is just one example. We also do this in child welfare. So to recap, this School of Social Work is very much invested in providing outstanding education to train students not only in the delivery of evidence-based practice, but also culturally appropriate services. And one reason why we can do this successfully is that we have a very diverse student body, and we are housed in a research-intensive university that provides many opportunities for our students to get involved in research projects, to take a variety of classes that they normally wouldn't take in other programs. And finally, we are focused on filling workforce gaps so that we can address the needs of Minnesotans. And as I mentioned, one of the examples is integrated behavioral health. Our tagline for the school is "Prepare to Build a Better World." And we are committed to partnering with our graduate students in this important work so that together we can address the diverse needs of communities throughout the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Lucas and members of the Board of Regents, for allowing us to showcase yet another one of our programs very quickly this afternoon, and that is our initial teaching preparation programs. And this rather complicated slide displays the many different pathways that we've tried to create in our college to being able to become a teacher and earn a license. And you'll see that there are pathways that are undergraduate, there are pathways that are post-baccalaureate, which involve 12 to 18 months after one has achieved a discipline-specific degree. There are new multiple pathways we've created for individuals who really want to become teachers, but for whom that's been financially not able to succeed in that regard, or they've gone off into the workforce and have decided to recircle back and become a teacher. And then we have a fifth-year pathway program also, that most of these pathway programs, other than the undergraduate one, also lead to a master's degree and a licensure, which I think makes our program very special and also affordable. I wanted to show you some data from the last couple years in terms of the enrollment and the demographics in our program. You'll be able to see that one of the key goals that we've been seeking to work on is to diversify the teaching force in Minnesota. It's a key goal for our state with the changing demographics in the state. And our numbers in this program area are significant. It's due to carefully redesigning our programs, significant recruitment and retention of our teachers, and then these new pathways that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about in some other slides. I think one of the other significant demographic features I wanted to talk about is the change in age range that we've had recently. Typically, you might think that our teaching force would be a little bit younger, but we have an age range now because of these multiple pathways of between age 21 and 66. This rather complicated slide is meant to display visually and through my explanation from left to right the significant ways that the state of Minnesota and the University of Minnesota ensure that teachers are prepared well, from the screening and admission time to the multiple assessments that they're asked to engage in throughout their preparation program that serve as somewhat as gates to make sure that they're learning what they need to know, and then the clinical work that they engage in school settings where they have to practice what they know and be able to show that to be able to progress throughout the program. We're also required by the state to have our students engage in several specific exams. One of them is the Minnesota Teacher Licensure Exam, which is a basic skills exam. that students need to take to show that they have the discipline-specific knowledge from which to teach from. And you'll see here over several different years, the middle column, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities students and their graduation rates, or rather their passing rates on this MTLE, and as compared to the state of Minnesota and other institutions that prepare teachers. And we typically always exceed our peers. And then at the bottom, you'll see that our students also have to take an exiting exam called the Ed TPA, which refers to, it's a teaching practice exam where they have to actually be videotaped as they're teaching, and then that's sent off to the Pearson scoring agency for their showcasing of their practical abilities. And you'll see again that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities mean on this exceeds the state mean and the national mean on their ability to show what they know as practicing teachers. I wanted to give you a sense of where our University of Minnesota students end up going and teaching. You'll see that they are spread across here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, in the suburbs, in rural areas, and then we have about 12% that seek positions in other states and 3% internationally. But for the most part, what's important here is that we prepare 83% of our graduates stay in Minnesota. They choose to do so, and that we work very hard with our counseling and career staff to ensure that there's the best match with the students' desires for where they want to teach and where they teach. But they're making a significant difference here in the state. I think what's key about this slide is that the state of Minnesota also expects us to collect significant survey data on our graduates. They want that data when they exit our program, and they want the data 1 year after they've practiced as teachers in school settings. And what you see here is what our graduates say when they complete the program about, would I recommend this program to someone that wants to be a teacher? And 92.5% of them say yes. But what's really great is after they've taught for a year and they really know what it takes, those percentages go up. This particular program I wanted to showcase because this is one of our new pathways to teaching that we've developed. It's a pathway for typically non-licensed individuals in the public schools, oftentimes teaching aides, who have lived in the community for many years and who really want to become a teacher. And this is a group of our first cohort of graduates from the Minneapolis Public Schools who participated in this program. That program was so successful, a residency program, that we ended up growing that program to multiple districts and starting what we refer to as MNGOT, the University of Minnesota Grow Your Own Teachers program. And this is a needed pathway, again, for teacher licensure for underrepresented future teachers, people of color, bilingual individuals, and first-generation college students. I wanted to show you a little data about what this program means to these individuals, many of whom are only earning about $25,000 a year as a teaching aide. But after coming to the University of Minnesota, participating in a program that is about 2 years where they can work full-time and then take coursework at night, on the weekends, and online, they are able to then earn their degree, a master's degree, their license, and begin in the Minneapolis public school system at about $49,000. And after 10 years, that investment grows to about $68,000. And I think that's a tremendous investment in people who are passionate about being teachers and in their lives and in what kind of quality life they're going to have. And as one of them says, I wouldn't be able to become a teacher if it wasn't for this program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lucas, members of the committee, Provost Hanson. I'm Craig Hedberg. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health and chair of our Education Policy Council. And the School of Public Health also does train PhD students and master's students, but our focus today is on our professional programs. And the two main professional degrees we offer are an MPH and a Master of Healthcare Administration. Within our Master of Public Health We have 9 traditional programs spanning a variety of epidemiology, biostatistics, environmental health, and then our Master of Healthcare Administration, which is related to some of our public health administration programs as well. We also have developed a number of dual degree programs to try to instill public health training and blend it with other professional programs, including all the other schools in the Academic Health Center, as well as the law school, and also with Master of Social Work as well. We have a couple executive programs for our MPH. We have the number 5 online MPH degree in the nation, and actually our online teaching has become very important to us, both as part of our training program for our dual degrees as well as these fully online programs. Our core curriculum for the MPH is mandated by our accrediting body, the Council on Education in Public Health, and each of the courses that comprises that core is available online for students to take on campus or off campus. And about 80% of students taking our core curriculum are using those online courses. The school, this is sort of a summary of our professional student profile. We currently have an enrollment of a little over 1,000 students. The average age of our students is 29, so we again are working with a lot of professionals who are adding to their knowledge, skills, and ability. 73% of our students are female. 26% are American Indians and students of color, and like the other schools, we try to continuously reach out and draw more diversity into our programs. And currently, that student body represents 38 different countries and 42 states across the nation. And this is a professional degree. We're here to train the next generation of public health professionals who will advance our understanding of how to improve the quality of life for Minnesotans and others. And we believe that we have a very good record of success with this. 98% of our students are employed within 12 months of graduating, and the average salary within 12 months across all the students in the School of Public Health is close to $80,000 per year. And we also are specifically building Minnesota's workforce. The majority of our graduates stay in Minnesota and become our state's hospital administrators, community health workers, health policy experts, research scientists, epidemiologists, and others. We have over 10,500 living alumni of the school. 69% of our graduates wind up staying in Minnesota. Some of our key issues, like other schools, funding is a critical one. With the loss of federal and state monies to support our programs, it puts a greater pressure on tuition dollars to help provide support for our programs. There also has been a tremendous growth in public health education around the country. In 2008, there were 40 schools of public health. In 2018, we have 64 schools of public health and over 100 programs in public health across different schools. And our MHA program is also competing with MBA programs. So competition for students is a real issue for us. And in that respect, financing and funding becomes a key issue as well. The top reasons for students declining our offers of admission are the lack of funding packages and the overall tuition cost of our program. We also feel that visibility has been something of an issue for us because public health touches everyone everywhere, but not a lot of people have a good understanding of the range of public health activities or the importance of public health activities for the community. In regard to the cost of our programs, Most of our programs are two-year programs. The basic MPH degree involves a series of 42 credits. And the cost of an MPH degree for residents is $43,369 for those 42 credits with fees. Non-resident students, the current cost is about $56,000. And on this slide on the bottom line is an average of non-resident cost of MPH training among public schools that are ranked in the top 10 of programs. So you can see that compared to other schools, we've been able to maintain a reasonable cost structure, but it still remains an issue for us. We did award 266 scholarships in fiscal year 2018 to 188 students. Those award amounts totaled to about $1.2 million. But about 63% of our students do graduate with debt. And the amount of that debt typically is reflecting the cost of the degree overall. We have been our tuition has been growing about 2% year on year. And to offset sort of the growth in tuition costs, particularly for non-resident students, and to increase our ability to attract non-resident students, we have developed a merit-based scholarship that allows us to basically charge in-state tuition to selected out-of-state students. The way that we manage our programs and establish our enrollment, we have a shared governance model within the School of Public Health. We have an education policy committee which is comprised of the program leaders for each of our program areas in the school, as well as the dean's office. And our job is to try to review the programs that exist, look at the curriculum that exists within each programs, and try to make sure that the program is meeting the needs of our stakeholder groups. We've also developed a data innovation project, creating a single source of data and decision-making support for the school regarding all of our student information, and trying to increase our student support, developing a continuous quality improvement program for our student services and programs, recruitment and scholarship, and are doing more in terms of local, regional, national, with targeted ad strategies, particularly using some of the social media-based advertising that has shown some encouraging returns. A lot of our development of programs outside of our core curriculum, which is mandated for us, is really the result of partnerships that we have with within the university, across the state, the nation, and the world. And it's really through this community engagement process and drawing on the community building wisdom of our partners that we're able to try to make sure that our curriculum is in fact meeting the workforce development needs around us. And this particular picture highlights one of our students who came into the school through our a certificate program in core concepts that was developed in part to help attract a diverse student body. And Admira Adwadi came through that program, matriculated through our executive program in public health, and is now a critical part of our outreach into the Somali community, among others. And I'll end with one of my personal points of pride, based on a long and strong relationship that the School of Public Health has had with the Minnesota Department of Health in many different areas, but I am personally involved in helping to train our food safety people within the school. And we have a dynamic program of having our students go to work for the State Health Department, where they learn firsthand the ins and outs of doing surveillance for foodborne diseases, but broader infectious disease programs. It's really transformed both the work of the department as well as the way that we help train students. And it's become a model that's being replicated nationally. In 2011, Senator Klobuchar inserted language into the Food Safety Modernization Act to basically take the model that was developed in Minnesota and transplant it around the country into other partnerships between public health agencies and schools of public health. And it's an example of the dynamic relationships we're building and the impact that those are having on the community. Thank you.
Well, thank you, all of you. That was very enlightening and a very broad spectrum. Do we have questions, comments from Regents? Anybody? Regent Johnson.
Madam Chair and Regents and the presenters, thank you. Quite a timely issue. Let me explain. I live in a county of 50,000 people and know a number of the social workers that work for the county and in the state. And just recently, one of them visited with me and said that the job, she works in child protection, is becoming more and more difficult and demanding, and wasn't sure that she was going to be able to continue in her career after 15 years. The reason I raised the issue is we know that's very demanding, it's stressful, it's disappointing, it's hurtful, all those things that happen in our society. Do you prepare in your program for social workers these kind of dastardly things that are happening in our society, so they get a little callous on their soul, if you will, and are prepared to go out into the world?
Chair Lucas, Regent Johnson, I don't know if we prepare people for calluses, but what we do in our program is we meet with our students in both years of the full-time MSW program, and we have a clinical seminar which doesn't focus on academics or readings, but more the experience of being in the field, internship, training, and how we can promote self-care is one of the issues that we address. One of my areas of research is actually job-related stress, specifically in dialysis social workers. So I study a very small spectrum of social workers, but we do infuse into our curriculum in our courses the importance of self-care, of monitoring how you're doing in this very difficult work. I don't know if there is a cure or sort of a silver bullet to help all social workers. The work is demanding, especially in child welfare and in healthcare. I would say in all sections of social work practice, but in child welfare in particular, job dissatisfaction can be very high, and we're aware of that. So what we've done is we've infused into our curriculum opportunities for students to share their experiences, to develop practical techniques to take care of themselves, like to go for a walk, to exercise, to manage their nutrition better. All of these things can help. So I'm not sure if I answered your question fully, but.
Madam Chair, just follow up. It seems as we move on in time that, at least my observation is that social work can't be a silo unto itself. And what I'm thinking about more and more is social workers working with police officers, social workers working with clergy, social workers working in the school system, and that broad-based approach to social life, if you will. And I see that in the press, especially in our larger communities and mid-range communities, that social teams are with police officers and attempting to work with folks who are troubled.
Correct.
It's more of an observation on my part, and I'm sure you know all of that, but...
Chair Lucas, Regent Johnson, I think you're pointing out a really critical issue right now. We refer to it as interprofessional practice, and that is something the Integrated Behavioral Health Program helps students learn about and engage in, but we can no longer live in silos and think that we're going to do our job well. We are training our students to think about breaking out of silos and to collaborate with other professionals. And that's not only a trend in social work, but we see it in other disciplines as well. And as you probably know, the university has the National Center on Professional Practice and Education, which is one of the most important centers in the nation for interprofessional practice. So our students get that training, and I actually built it into the curriculum for all of the integrated behavioral health fellows in our MSW program.
Madam Chair, could I follow up briefly?
Sure.
Dr. Lanyon, a question I have is people who gain their various degrees and think about graduate school. My sense is from time to time that folks don't go to graduate school because the cost. You know, I can't further my debt anymore. And we're losing some very talented academics and researchers because of that. Is that an issue that, you know, I saw part of it that you have discussed and thought about in your line of thinking?
Chair Lucas, Regent Johnson, yes, that's absolutely part of the issue here. One is that there are students who are fully aware of what graduate education is and what they could do with a graduate degree, but because of their undergraduate student debt, they don't feel like that's a choice for them. But there's another very large population of students that don't actually understand what graduate education is, and assume that it's about becoming a faculty member and that that's not what they had in mind, and so don't realize what doors are opened by having a graduate degree. That's a problem for us nationally that we need to work on educating undergraduate students about the possibilities.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes before we go to the consent report, but we have two regents that we want to hear from. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. I'll be very brief. Thank you very much, presenters. I thought it was fascinating, really areas that are crucial to our society today. I just have a very specific question. For the School of Social Work, for social workers, do you need some additional training to be a school social worker? Do you need an education degree too? Or just getting a social work degree, graduate degree, does that qualify you to be in a school system?
Chair Lucas, Regent Cohen, you do not require a master's degree in education in order to be a school-based social worker. Students who are interested in pursuing that particular area of practice in schools can do that in a master's program in general. And more specifically, the tailored training happens in their internship experience, both in the first and second years. Our students will complete a little over 1,000 hours of internship experience over a 2-year period. And that is where they get the specialized training specifically related to schools. But no, you can get an MSW and work in schools, and actually it's a great opportunity for social workers because it's an outstanding career choice for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, presenters. This is a very encouraging presentation. One of the things that that struck me when you had the slide up about the percentages that thought different things about their experience, and on the one hand, I saw the faculty seek a diverse viewpoint, and I thought, hey, 90%, and then I thought, well, wait a minute, that means 10%, is something that I think is a little hard to measure, because then when you show the next slide, you got some where it's 100% and some that are much lower percentages, and so that was a very interesting dynamic to see, and that you're able to capture that kind of information. The main point I wanted to make is that when you talk about, when I look at the folks that are going through your programs and the level of education that they need to attain, the work that they put in, I was really encouraged to see that there's a relatively small debt load in some capacities. But this is an area where our capacity to whether it's dealing with undergraduate debt that you just talked about a moment ago, to keep people heading on a path that they would have the sort of heart and desire to pursue, I think that's something that we need to maybe figure out how to identify earlier, to find great candidates from a wide range of communities. but also even just looking at ways of ensuring that those small groups that do end up with a lot of debt that we're able to find ways of preventing that from causing problems for those individuals, preventing them from pursuing their passion of serving the public. Because these groups of folks that you are describing, to me, are just the most amazing people. You know, we don't have to worry about buyout clauses in their contracts very often, right? Because they're going to go out and they're going to make, you know, they'll be able to put some food on the table, certainly, but they're not in this to make a lot of money. They're in this because they want to serve. And when you think of what they do for that individual that they're serving, whether it's a child with born with an addiction problem, or whether it's a community public health issue, boy, this is really where the rubber hits the road for an institution like the University of Minnesota. So to the extent that we can get more into opportunities to encourage people to pursue this career if it's where their heart is. And again, these are amazing people because they take things on that I don't know that I would have the fortitude to deal with day in and day out through their careers. I would certainly be open to that continuing conversation to keep this opportunity available for the widest range of folks. And I think what you produce makes the world a better place as much as any other program that we would have at the University of Minnesota. So thank you.
Agreed. One more. Regent Powell.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chair Lucas. And thank you to presenters. I think it was mentioned that in the next part of this discussion, there's going to be more of a focus, if you will, on some of the numbers and the metrics around graduate education. And this, I think, comes a little bit off of Regent Roche's comments. And I'll be very interested in looking at that. It does seem that, you know, for all the challenges that we face and that we think about for undergraduate education, when we're trying to balance access and cost and debt and all these things, those problems are greatly magnified at the graduate student level. You know, what is rough water for undergrads is, you know, sometimes they think it's a tsunami for graduate students. They really are. Tuition's very high, debt loads are very high, stress levels are high. And that worries me a lot because of the critical role that these people play in not only Minnesota, but the nation's research infrastructure. And so it seems to me like it is a problem for us, but this is very much of a national problem. And so I look forward to sort of delving in more to the numbers and you know, where we're heading. A very specific question. I think you showed a very impressive table. The University of Minnesota ranked, I think, number 5 or 6, you know, among degree producing, you know, which I think is very impressive, and we punch well above our weight in that area. And I'm wondering if you can maybe give us a few of the reasons that make us so exceptionally good at producing PhD students, you know, given the size of the population of the state and of the institution.
Chair Lucas, Regent Powell, members of the committee, the quick answer is we have really, really, really great faculty. And so students are actively seeking out the opportunity to come to the University of Minnesota. That's one. Another source is that we are the research university, the research system in the state. So students who wish to pursue graduate degrees, in many cases professional degrees, in Minnesota, this is the place they're going to come to. And you can see that in the GradSera results that indicate why students come here. One of the main reasons is actually location. Right? This is a great place for them to pursue it. They're pursuing careers at the same time, could be a variety of things. So there are a number of reasons. The other thing to always keep in mind is we are a comprehensive university. Right? So in many ways, we are serving the state the same way Michigan State and University of Michigan does. Right? And so that's another reason why. But I'll go back to my first comment, which is don't lose sight of the fact that there are great faculty at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was a great presentation. We all feel better. But we now have to turn our attention to the consent report, and Provost Hanson, if you can walk us through that.
Thank you, Chair Lucas. The October consent report is before you. College of Biological Sciences is creating 2 new minors in computational biology, cellular and molecular neuroscience, and it's changing the name of an existing minor. Medical school is creating fellowships in integrated vascular surgery and pediatric obesity medicine. And the consent report contains tenure conferral for 2 recent hires, and I wanted to note particularly a promotion in rank for the Dean of the School of Dentistry. Details about those hires and the promotion, including brief bios of the individuals, are in your docket materials. I also want to correct an error in the September 2018 tenured outside hires listing. Professor Prakash Kara in the Department of Neuroscience in the medical school was erroneously identified as being recommended for hire as an associate professor with tenure, but today's consent report amends that listing so that to reflect your being recommended to be approved as Professor Kara is being recommended to be approved as at the rank of professor. So that is the consent report.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent report? Second.
Second.
Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Finally, are there any information items?
Yes, there are a couple of things. Thank you, Regent Lucas. Included in your docket materials is a copy of the second annual report of the Bias Response and Referral Network. I wanted to call your attention to this. This is a committee charged by President Kaler in 2016, and it serves as a point of contact for students who've experienced or believe they've experienced or witnessed incidents of hate or bias on the Twin Cities campus. The work of the committee includes responding to reported incidents by providing referrals. That's all it does, really, to appropriate offices and resources. The committee logs the reported incidents and provides information to senior leaders and appropriate offices about campus trends, but it doesn't play a role in the investigation of incidents nor in any actions that occur as a result of follow-up. Those are referred to the offices that we already have, where there are experts in those areas. And then the other item is the long list again of awards and honors and rankings that have come in that pertain to our faculty, staff, and students. Either awards, honors to individuals, sometimes to units of the universities, and I commend them to you. They're encouraging to read.
Okay, thank you. I think we're finished. Thank you, everyone. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. You do good. You get done before Anderson does.